Story 1.
My wife cheated on me with her boss, but I moved on to happiness while she lost it all. Yes, my wife cheated on me, and indeed she left me for another man. Initially, I was consumed by rage and wished to damage both of them, however, that never materialized. Nevertheless, I acknowledge this might appear as a revenge story, though that was never my intention. I'm Randy Clipson, just an ordinary guy. I'm not a handsome figure, and a significant portion of my life was marked by excess weight. A shift occurred in high school due to my involvement in football, earning me the nickname Chipper. They used to say that if I chipped someone, they were going down. At 6 feet 3 inches in height and weighing 260 lbs, playing football was somewhat expected. While not excelling as an athlete, I possessed substantial upper body strength even in high school, enabling me to push defensive linemen backward. Football proved instrumental throughout my 4 school years, aiding in shedding the excess fat I had carried for most of my life. Despite retaining a bit of a belly, the accumulated muscle more than compensated. Nonetheless, having been overweight for most of my life, the self-perception as a fatty lingered. Coupled with this mindset, I was painfully shy due to constant weight-related teasing during grade and middle school. In high school, being a football player shielded me from such mockery, and it came with certain privileges, no longer making me an outcast among the girls. Despite not attracting cheerleaders, some girls were willing to go out with me. Nonetheless, I didn't engage in much dating until my senior year when I crossed paths with Cindy. Cindy Crawley transferred to our school in the latter part of my junior year, but she caught my attention only in senior year. Despite possessing the most beautiful face I had ever seen, Cindy carried at least 30 to 40 pounds of extra weight. This deterred most boys in my class, and I regret to admit that I initially shared that lack of interest. Our connection deepened when we became chemistry partners. While the subject was complicated for me, Cindy excelled and provided significant assistance. I owe her for my success in chemistry, which likely paved the way for my college journey. During our partnership, I discovered Cindy's friendly and humorous nature, along with the shared background of starting school late. Cindy had overcome a congenital heart defect, and I was held back a year by my parents, making both of us 19. Summoning all my courage, I decided to ask her out, understanding her initial suspicion given her challenging past. Despite her reluctance, she agreed to go out with me. Our first date, a simple outing to the movies followed by an ice cream soda, was enjoyable. However, my shyness prevented me from attempting to kiss her. Instead, I shook her hand and asked if I could call her, and her thrilled reaction led to several subsequent dates over the next few weeks. By the third date, I summoned the courage to give Cindy a kiss on the cheek, progressing to necking and reaching first base. The more I encountered Cindy, the more my affection for her deepened. While my developing romance was progressing, the football season took an unexpected turn. Cavern High, my high school, wasn't renowned for football prowess, but this season brought a surprising alignment of stars. Kirk Simmons, our standout quarterback, led the team with the Bailey twins, Todd and Jason, serving as our running backs. Now positioned as the left tackle, I successfully shielded Kirk's blindside, ensuring he remained unscathed. Despite losing our initial game to Mohawk High with a score of 21-7, a perennial football powerhouse, we rebounded with 7 consecutive wins, progressing to the regionals. Although we reached the state finals and suffered a 28-4 defeat from Towson High, there was a positive note, triumphing over Mohawk High in the semifinals with a satisfying 38-7 victory. My apologies for the occasional indulgence in reminiscing about the glory days of high school football. Meanwhile, my relationship with Cindy continued evolving to the next level. As prom season approached, I promptly invited Cindy to be my date. Her joyful acceptance was sealed with a big, affectionate kiss. Over the 4 weeks leading up to the prom, Cindy underwent a crash diet, shedding about 20 lbs to fit into the prom dress she had acquired. When I picked her up for the prom, my eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Despite being what most guys might consider on the heavier side, I found her stunning. Cindy always had a generous bust, but it became more pronounced in that light blue prom dress. The dress struggled to contain her chest, which threatened to spill over. The entire evening was a dream as we danced together. As the night concluded, I suggested going parking, but Cindy had different plans, directing me to a wooded area about 30 miles outside of town. Cindy explained that her uncle had a small cabin he used for hunting. The cabin was indeed small, featuring only a tiny kitchen, a couch in front of a television, a bed, and a bathroom. We started on the sofa with our usual playfulness, concluding the night on a high note. Despite our extracurricular activities, I got Cindy back home 15 minutes before her 2 a.m. curfew. Cindy and I remained close throughout the rest of high school, engaging in a physical relationship while being cautious with protection. Following graduation, I received a partial football scholarship at a Division II school 2 states away, while Cindy opted for a local community college. My major was computer science, and hers was psychology. Since I was heading off to school, we discussed what to do about our relationship. By mutual agreement, we decided to break up, feeling it wouldn't be fair to hold each other back. It was the toughest decision I had ever made. I can't even explain how awful I felt going off to school and leaving Cindy behind. She told me that if we were meant to be together, it would happen. I was terrified of losing her and hurting so badly. Upon my arrival at Mountain Ridge University, the thought of heading straight home crossed my mind, but I couldn't go back on my commitment. I had pledged to honor my commitment to the university, and my strong desire for a college education fueled my determination. The only solution I could think of was immersing myself in football practices and schoolwork from morning till night. I dedicated myself to keeping my mind occupied, despite the coach's advice against it. My coaches and teachers were impressed by my work ethic. Taking a full load of classes and being a college football player meant shedding fat and building muscle through intensive weight training, resulting in both upper and lower body strength. With only a partial scholarship, my parents covered the remaining balance, even though I knew they struggled with the cost. Playing football left me with no means to contribute financially. While I lacked funds to come home, I made a weekly call to Cindy, who appeared as devastated by our split as I was. My first college year concluded successfully, excelling in both football and academics. By the third game of the season, I earned a spot in the starting lineup, shifting to play left guard due to my slower speed. My increased strength proved beneficial, contributing to our 8-2 season record. Academically, I ended the year on the dean's list, much to my parents' delight. During the summer, Cindy and I resumed our relationship. I found myself deeply in love with her, or so I believed at the time. Reflecting on it, I've questioned whether it was love or just lust. After careful consideration, I lean towards love, as a small part of me still holds affection for her. I worked and took 3 online courses during the summer, determined to finish college as soon as possible. Cindy and I also resumed our bed activities, exploring each other's bodies whenever possible. I completed college in 3 years and married Cindy right after graduation. Both employed by the multinational software and electronics company Tri-Orbit Electronics in Virginia, we worked in software development and human resources, respectively. After saving enough money, we purchased a small house and began discussing starting a family. The first 3.5 years of our marriage were wonderful. Except for one aspect, we both gained a significant amount of weight. Cindy reached 230 lbs, and I weighed in at 310 lbs. I carried the extra weight better due to my height, but neither of us was content with the excess pounds. Despite unsuccessful attempts at dieting, my love for Cindy remained unwavering, regardless of her size. After 3 years of marriage with no kids, we consulted our family doctor. Following a series of tests, he found nothing wrong with either of us but suggested weight loss might aid Cindy's conception. So, for the first time in our lives, we embarked on a strict diet. 6 months later, Cindy was down 50 lbs, while I was only down about 25, but I must admit that I cheated more than I should have. Cindy's weight loss was noticeable, attracting attention from men. Alongside the diet, Cindy began going to the gym 5 days a week. Observing her transformation, I realized I had to step up my efforts. I strictly adhered to our diet and started hitting the gym with her. By the end of 1 year of dieting, Cindy had shed 80 lbs, and I had lost 90. While we both felt really good about ourselves, sadly, our weight loss was going to bring me a broken heart. As Cindy continued to lose weight, she started dressing in more revealing clothing. Initially enjoyable, I became displeased when I overheard some comments at work. However, I couldn't say anything because for her whole life, Cindy had been an ugly duckling. Now she had turned into a beautiful swan. The real problem for me arose when Kirk Simmons was appointed head of human resources. He was now a senior director of the company. I was just a senior programmer, and he was now 2 levels above me, becoming Cindy's boss. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Kirk was married to Susie Looper, who had been a cheerleader in high school. I had seen her at company functions, and she was still quite attractive. Hardly noticing her, I ended up dancing with her at my wife's request as she danced with her boss during a Christmas party. I danced a few times with Susie, while Kirk partnered with Cindy, dancing just beside her. I found myself becoming noticeably excited. It wasn't a big deal, though, as, still being in my 22nd, any pretty girl could elicit the same response. One surprising aspect was that she wasn't a stuck-up snob, which pleased me. Upon Kirk and I arriving, "I didn't recognize you or Cindy," Susie complimented us, expressing that we looked fabulous. My perception of Cindy's beauty had always been high, but now she was truly stunning. I mentioned, somewhat embarrassed, that someone should keep an eye on her. The response was a simple, "Thank you." I expressed gratitude for Susie's kindness, and she blushed in response. The music concluded, and around 5 months before our 4th anniversary, Cindy revealed a significant decision. She informed me of her choice to resume taking birth control pills. I raised objections, inquiring about our plans for having children. She straightforwardly mentioned that she had decided not to have any at the moment. My anger surfaced as I probed into her abrupt decision. She reassured me, stroking my arm, stating, "Look, we can have kids. I just don't want to get fat again. I want to enjoy being slim for a while." In hindsight, I should have recognized the problem at that moment, but I was clueless, having complete trust in Cindy. Unfortunately, my trust in Kirk was misplaced, as I could trust him as far as I could throw a bus. Unbeknownst to me, Kirk had put on a full-court press to get Cindy. She, of course, was flattered beyond belief that the former football captain of our high school team was pursuing her. I first became concerned when Cindy began working late and then going, supposedly, out with girlfriends. I was genuinely clueless about these things, but I'm not stupid. When Cindy started coming in later and later, I became suspicious. I didn't want to believe that she was cheating on me, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I hired a PI company, and within a week, they had all the evidence I needed. They had a video of Cindy and Kirk engaging in a lovemaking act in the office. How they obtained that, I have no idea. They had pictures of them being affectionate at dinner. Videos showed Kirk coming to my house while I was at work. Lastly, there were pictures of them engaging in a lovemaking act on our living room floor. I knew they took those through the front window of our house. Remember when I said that I couldn't really describe what it was like having closeness with Cindy the first time? Well, I have no words to explain the pain that I felt finding out that my wife was cheating on me. Not only that, but she was cheating with someone who had been a friend of mine. Granted, Kirk and I were not close, but I had still considered him a friend. It hurt unbelievably. I still held out hope that once I confronted Cindy, she would come to her senses. I was in love with her, and I thought she was still in love with me. I took the evidence home that night, and after dinner I told Cindy we needed to talk. She looked at me curiously, but sat at the kitchen table to listen. Cindy immediately turned white and then buried her face in her hands. She started to cry and ran to the bathroom. I went and knocked on the door, but she refused to open it. I waited in the kitchen with a glass of rum. Finally, she came out and sat down at the kitchen table with her head down. I spoke coldly, asking what the other person had to say. She mentioned that she didn't intend for it to happen, speaking in a voice just above a whisper. Cindy reacted, expressing disapproval and stating that there was no need for crudeness. She implied that if I had paid more attention to her, the situation might have been avoided. Initially taken aback, I briefly considered whether I had neglected her. However, my anger resurfaced, and I asserted that she shouldn't try to shift the blame. I maintained my innocence and confronted her about the affair, asking for her explanation. She looked nervously at me but remained silent. I pressed further, inquiring about our next steps. Struggling to control my anger, I questioned whether she wanted to be with Kirk or with me. Despite expressing love for me, she tearfully admitted to also loving Kirk. I conveyed that a decision needed to be made, almost biting my tongue. I set a deadline, insisting on knowing her choice by the next day. If she chose to stay with me, she would have to sever ties with Kirk, resign from her job, and commit to attending counseling. Cindy acknowledged this. Later, I retrieved all her belongings, placing them in the hall, and informed her that she could sleep in the guest room until she made up her mind. The next day, I returned home early from work. The truth was that I couldn't concentrate and was less than useless. My stomach had been doing flip-flops all day. At one point during the morning, I thought I was going to lose what little breakfast I had eaten. About 6 o'clock, Cindy came in with a very nervous look on her face. I was sitting at the kitchen table, as I had the previous night. She took a seat across from me, and I demanded to know if she had made up her mind. Tears started to flow down her cheek as she expressed her love for me, but admitted an inability to give up Kirk, stating that she loved him too. I sighed deeply, attempting to conceal the fact that my heart was breaking. Acknowledging her choice, she simply nodded, causing a pain deeper than if someone had stabbed me. My brain was about to explode. I was going back and forth at 1,000,000 miles an hour between eliminating them both and curling up in the corner and crying my eyes out. I sarcastically remarked that she had chosen quite the winner. Bringing up Kirk and Susie's new baby boy, I questioned whether it bothered her to leave the child without a father. A hint of anger and shame crossed Cindy's face as she mentioned that Kirk had planned to divorce Susie before their involvement. Continuing, I asked if she was willing to discard almost 4 years of marriage just like that. Struggling to contain both my temper and tears, I sought an understanding of her decision. To be truthful, right then, I was seriously considering smacking Cindy to a pulp and then going to look for Kirk to break his neck. She softly expressed regret for any hurt caused, her voice tender. She clarified that she hadn't intended for it to happen, but had fallen deeply in love with Kirk, and he felt the same way. Despite feeling an intense urge to damage her at that moment, I recognized the importance of maintaining control. It required all my self-control, but I eventually succeeded. Deep within the logical part of my brain, I recognized that resorting to physical violence would yield nothing. I refrained from revealing the depth of my hurt and refused to beg her to stay, considering it the worst thing a cheated-on husband could do, a sign of total weakness. I plainly stated that if the other person desired a divorce, they would have it. Confusion filled her eyes, and perhaps I imagined it, a hint of hurt. She might have expected me to fight to keep her, but I knew that if she had decided to leave, there was nothing I could do or say to stop her. Cindy was taken aback by my behavior but rose and started packing her belongings. The following day, I visited the bank and our financial advisor, explaining the situation and withdrawing half the funds from each account. I then established separate accounts in my name only, canceled all our credit cards, and applied for new ones solely in my name. I listed our house for sale through a realtor friend and finally consulted a divorce lawyer. With a heart full of hatred, I ensured Cindy was served at work, citing infidelity as the cause. The divorce proceedings were relatively straightforward. With only about 4 years of marriage and no children, there was nothing to dispute. We split everything evenly and went our separate ways. Kirk's divorce was messier. Dealing with a child under a year old and Susie having never worked, he faced child support and alimony. One aspect of Kirk's divorce that admittedly brought me some satisfaction was his decision to cut costs on his lawyer. Instead of limiting spousal maintenance to a year or two, it was set at 15 years. Kirk wasn't pleased, but he signed the papers. 2 months after the divorces were finalized, Kirk and Cindy got married. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The initial week post-breakup left me utterly lost. Not being much of a drinker, that held no appeal. For weeks, revenge consumed my thoughts. I'm sure every guy who's been cheated on can relate. I even began searching the internet for information on how ex-husbands sought revenge on their former wives and lovers. I found myself in a dark place, even purchasing a weapon. Then, as I read story after story about guys getting revenge, a shift occurred in my perspective. Initially, my thoughts of revenge were centered on violence. Subsequently, I considered damaging their property, contemplating ideas like flattening all their tires, putting sugar in their gas tanks, flooding their new house, and various other impractical schemes. As I read more revenge stories, I recognized the absurdity in most of them, realizing no feasible way to achieve the revenge I desired. Eventually, I sought counseling at my church. The pastor spent almost 2 hours explaining that seeking revenge wouldn't alleviate the hurt from my wife's betrayal. Regardless of how much pain I inflicted on my former wife or her new husband, the emotional anguish would persist. The pastor's advice, though seemingly simple for someone with my kind of pain, emphasized that only time and distance would heal my heart. Despite my initial skepticism, I acknowledged that being near Cindy without the possibility of being with her would continually reopen the emotional wound. I also accepted the pastor's truth about revenge. It wouldn't alleviate the hurt. Consequently, I followed his counsel, necessitating the establishment of distance between Cindy and me. An opportunity arose when I heard rumors that the company was in trouble. Apparently, the firm had entered into a contract with the Defense Department. The deal promised significant profits, but there was a downside. Our firm was charged with developing an entirely new software and electronics package for the Air Force's fighters and bombers. It's entirely classified, so I can't provide details. Suffice it to say, it aimed to position the United States ahead of Russia and China, contingent on my company's successful delivery. The rumor circulating was that the project was significantly behind and over budget, making it different from typical government contracts. While substantial profits were at stake, the company faced great risk. Unlike other government projects, there would be no progress payments during the development of this software and its accompanying electronic components. Tremendous penalties loomed for late delivery, and the company could possibly go under if the project didn't meet the contract requirements. As one of the senior software designers, I was called in to consult on the impending disaster. Most other designers were hesitant to get involved, updating their resumes and considering leaving the company. Taking on the project meant risking termination and potential company collapse. The stigma of failure would linger for a long time. However, considering my modest needs post-divorce, the prospect of losing my job seemed manageable. Learning that Cindy was pregnant added emotional weight, as I had always envisioned starting a family with her. Evaluating the project data provided, it became clear that the chosen direction wouldn't work. Despite the risks, I agreed to take on the assignment and headed for California, putting about 3,000 miles between my ex-wife and me. Reminiscent of my first year in college, I delved into my work, enduring long days, sometimes spanning 20 hours, leaving little time to contemplate Cindy. I terminated 3/4 seconds of the programmers and all engineers handling electronic components, bringing in fresh talent. Despite the looming 11-month deadline, I scrapped their progress, relying on the creativity of engineers I brought on board, including some poached from rival companies. Their skepticism turned to astonishment when I explained what I wanted them to build and why I envisioned the electronic components in that particular way. Yet the challenge shifted to making the software functional. Gradually, we crafted a program that instilled confidence in me. It wasn't until 3 weeks before delivering our product to the military that I was certain of our success. The initial test merging the software and electronic components displayed a 96% success rate. Scanning the 4% that hadn't worked, I identified easy fixes. The revelation of our program's success triggered a surge in company stocks by over 300 points within a couple of months. Subsequently, the Defense Department announced the expansion of our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines, forecasting billions in profits. The success didn't halt there. I recognized the potential to tweak the program for various commercial applications. Essentially, we removed all classified information, creating an outstanding platform for practical uses. The array of things adaptable to this program seemed boundless. Following this triumph, I earned a promotion to Senior Vice President, tasked with developing these commercial applications. In the years that followed, frequent returns to the Virginia home office never led to encounters with Kirk or Cindy. Despite not anticipating any impact on me, I desired no contact, having nothing to convey to either of them. The pastor's counsel about putting time and distance between heartbreak had proven 100% accurate. I had moved on. During one visit, I unexpectedly met Kelly Bailey, a former cheerleader from Cavern High and Susie's best friend. Aware of her marriage to Jason Bailey and having a son before I met Cindy, I always harbored a crush on Kelly, the prettiest cheerleader. Kelly's warm demeanor in high school made her impossible not to like. Although she had aged somewhat, she remained physically attractive. In contrast to Cindy's short blonde hair and ample figure, Kelly, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, had long black hair and a proportionally smaller chest. A shared warmth in their smiles was the commonality. Stunned that she recognized me in a grocery store, preparing for a board presentation, we exchanged smiles. Despite a few gray hairs and small wrinkles, I still had a slight crush. Kelly called out to me as I pondered over frozen dinners. Upon recognizing her voice, I blushed slightly. She then stopped her basket next to mine, and I greeted her with a smile, expressing my flattery at her recognition. She confessed that she wouldn't have recognized me if Susie hadn't pointed me out during lunch at Tri-Orbit. I was genuinely surprised when she mentioned that. She then smiled and confirmed that she had been working at Tri-Orbit for about 6 years, specifically in the marketing department. It surprised me to learn that Kelly worked at the same company as me. I felt a twinge of guilt for not knowing that, however, since I had little involvement with marketing, I shouldn't have felt bad. Still, I felt like I should have been aware. "How are you doing?" I eventually asked to ease my discomfort. "I'm doing as well as can be expected," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. "I'm divorced now. Jason has turned out to be a real idiot. Not only was he cheating with his secretary, but also with half a dozen other women. He even got one of them pregnant. I divorced him, of course. He got off pretty lightly considering what he was doing. There was no alimony because our salaries are about the same. We didn't own a house and had very little savings. All he was ordered to do was pay child support. Still, I have to hassle him for it every month. I don't mind bugging him to get the money, but he totally ignores our son, Scott. I get furious when I think about it," she said. I apologized to Kelly, expressing regret over Jason's behavior. I admitted that although I was aware he had a wild side, I had hoped he would calm down after marriage. Pausing for a moment, I looked into Kelly's emerald green eyes, feeling unsure of what to say next. Eventually, I mentioned that my wife and I were divorced, with Cindy choosing to pursue. "Todd? No, Randy?" Kelly shook her head. "It was Kirk who pursued Cindy. Susie told me all about it." "I suppose I can't argue with that," I admitted, "but it takes two to tango." "You're not seriously thinking about eating any of these frozen dinners, are you?" she asked, eyeing my cart. "Yeah, I'm afraid so," I nodded. "I'm a terrible cook, and this is about all I can handle." "Look, if you'd like a home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my house? It won't be fancy, but I guarantee it will be good." Initially, I hesitated, but the idea of a home-cooked meal proved too tempting to resist. I mentioned that I wouldn't mind having a real meal if it wasn't too much trouble. I couldn't recall the last time I had one. The evening turned out to be delightful. Kelly made meatloaf with mashed potatoes, string beans, and sherbet for dessert. It was enjoyable having someone to converse with. Scotty, as his mother called him, was a very outgoing and friendly kid. I discovered that he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan like me. We had a great time discussing the team and their prospects for the upcoming season. I was a die-hard fan and also a season ticket holder. In fact, I had 4 season tickets on the 50-yard line. The company covered them because I would take potential clients to the games. When I didn't have any clients, I'd invite my buddies, and if I couldn't find anyone to go with me, I'd go alone. I'd give away the other 3 tickets, usually to people trying to buy from a scalper. Scotty expressed a wish to attend a game someday, sounding wistful. In response, I impulsively offered to make it happen. Once the words left my mouth, I realized I had overstepped and swiftly attempted to rectify it. That is, of course, if your mother approves. Scotty turned to his mother with imploring eyes. All she said is, "We'll discuss it." At the end of the evening, I apologized. "I'm sorry about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offer. It slipped out before I realized. But just so you know, I have 4 season tickets to all the Bucs home games and a ton of frequent flyer miles. If you wouldn't mind him attending a game with me, I'd be thrilled to take him." She stood there with piercing eyes, and I realized that I had made another mistake. Quickly, I attempted to rectify it, but only ended up making another blunder. After a brief pause, I stuttered out that the invitation also extended to her. I suggested securing separate rooms, with one for Kelly and Scotty and another for myself. Despite feeling embarrassed, Kelly simply smiled and called me the sweetest man. While chuckling, she remarked that my expression was priceless. Feeling relieved, I sighed as I truly didn't want to offend her. I enjoyed her company and hoped we could meet up from time to time. Deciding to push ahead, I said, "Would you mind if I asked you out when I come to town? If you're with someone, I'll understand. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to." Kelly studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Randy, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but never considered dating you because I had Jason. Now that I've gotten to know you a little, yes, I'd be pleased if you called me, and I'd love to go see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with you and Scotty." Over the following year, I'd call Kelly every time I returned to Virginia, and we'd get together several times. I booked trips back east when I really didn't have to be there. It wasn't a love affair at first. We were just good friends who enjoyed spending time together. I took Kelly and Scotty to the final game of the season that year. The Bucs needed to win to make it into the playoffs, and they did. Scotty was beside himself with joy over the win. That night, after Scotty went to bed, Kelly came over to my room, and we became more than just good friends. When Kelly knocked on my door unexpectedly, I was engrossed in watching a local sports station analyze the Bucs game. Concerned, I asked if everything was all right, particularly about Scotty's well-being. Kelly reassured me with a smile that nothing was wrong and that Scotty was sleeping peacefully. Excited about the playoffs, she expressed a desire to have a drink and talk. Feeling a bit underdressed in my boxer shorts and t-shirt, I mentioned that I needed to put on some pants before inviting her in. However, upon searching for my trousers, I realized they weren't where I thought I had left them. Kelly said there was no need for pants as she pushed the door open and entered the room hurriedly. As I continued searching for my pants without success, Kelly giggled at the situation, causing my face to flush red with embarrassment. She then suggested putting us on an even playing field if I felt uncomfortable and proceeded to remove her skirt, leaving us both in our underwear. With a smile, she asked me to mix her a drink and join her for a conversation. I went to the mini bar, retrieving 2 small bottles of rum and 2 cans of Coke. As I mixed the drinks, Kelly climbed onto my bed and sat cross-legged, her white-laced underwear catching my attention. After handing Kelly her drink, I looked around the room for a place to sit. Sensing my hesitation, Kelly gestured toward the bed and invited me to sit beside her, reassuring me that she wouldn't bite. Despite still feeling embarrassed and red-faced, I nodded and took a seat next to her. A big swallow of my drink helped me relax as the rum coursed through my body. We talked for a while, and when we finished our drinks, I took her cup and asked if she wanted another. She shook her head, and I waited for her to get up. I figured she'd head back to her son. I was totally wrong about that. Not sure what to do, I put the cups in the wastebasket and sat down again. When I did, Kelly kissed me on the lips. It was quick and soft, sending an electrical charge through my body. She saw my surprise and smiled. "I've been waiting for months for you to kiss me. I figured that you still thought of me as that high school cheerleader who was unattainable." Let me assure you that I am not that person anymore. Kelly had read me like a book. There had been so many times that I wanted to kiss her but was afraid. I didn't want to take a chance of losing her as a friend. I leaned forward and kissed her. We kissed a long time, with our tongues exploring every part of each other's mouths. She tasted so sweet. After we parted ways, I expressed admiration, mentioning that she was a beautiful and amazing woman. Kelly then laid her head on my chest. That night of passion surpassed my first time with Cindy. 6 months after that night, Kelly and I became engaged. Scotty was thrilled that I was going to be his dad. A year after that night, we were married. Jason had been as big a turd as Kelly had claimed. He barely spoke to his son, and he really resented me. Jason was still close friends with Kirk, and every time he came to Kelly's apartment when I was there, he had to tell me how happy they were and what great closeness Kirk and Cindy were having. I guess he thought it would make me jealous. I just listened and said nothing. What I did learn was that Kirk was still heading up the human resources department for the company. But Cindy had given up her job to be a full-time mom. I was a little surprised to learn that Kirk and Cindy had 3 kids now, but it no longer bothered me at all. One time, when I heard Kelly on the phone giving Jason hell for not sending the support payment, I made the mistake of telling her to forget about it. I was more than willing to pay whatever for Scotty's needs. Kelly spoke sternly, insisting that I needed to stay out of the situation. She expressed determination not to let him off the hook for child support despite his neglect of his son. I promptly withdrew my statement, acknowledging that the money in question belonged to Scotty. In December, I was set to be appointed executive vice president of the company. The announcement was scheduled for the Christmas party at the Washington Convention Center, with around 400 to 500 attendees. I felt a bit self-conscious about the grand recognition at this event, but Kelly was overjoyed. She scolded me for complaining, insisting that I deserved the recognition. I know almost as many people in that company as you do, and they've told me story after story about how this company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. They also told me that you'll be the next CEO when Mel steps down next year, she said. I responded, suggesting that it may not matter. However, she countered with a smile, mentioning that she was married to the most beautiful woman in the world and had a surprise for me. We recalled a past incident in Kansas City involving a mishap with a rubber. I acknowledged the memory with a nod, which was followed by a silly grin. She confirmed that she was pregnant now, expressing her determination to keep me close. Embracing me tightly, she expressed her desire for a night in bed if we didn't have to attend the party. I confessed that I wasn't particularly fond of parties anymore, as I had to attend so many that they had lost their appeal. Kelly, however, still seemed to enjoy them, especially when I was with her. She had a certain aura that attracted people to her. We danced for a while before running into Kirk and Cindy, who were accompanied by Jason and his date, Kathy. I was genuinely surprised to see Cindy's weight gain and Kirk's protruding belly, while Jason remained in good shape. I speculated that Jason might still be actively seeking romantic encounters. I was unsure what to do, but then someone began talking over the public address system. Could I have your attention for just a moment? I realized it was Mel Stanton, the CEO of Tri-Orbit. I promise I won't give a long speech. As most of you know, we've been looking to replace Charlie Bruner, our executive vice president, who retired 3 months ago. I knew who I wanted right away, but the board dithered around for 3 months. Well, after months of interviewing dozens of candidates, they finally agreed with me. I'm thrilled to announce that our new executive vice president comes from within our own organization. He has always been a tremendous asset, and now it's time he receives his just reward. I give you our next executive vice president, Randy Clipson. A spotlight was suddenly shining on me, and loud applause broke out from all around the room. Kelly pulled me to her and gave me a long, passionate kiss. When the commotion ended and the party returned to normal, I turned to where Cindy, Kirk, Jason, and his date were standing. I didn't know what to say to them. Jason seemed pissed and jealousy filled Kirk's face. However, when I glanced at Cindy, there was a look of sadness and loss. Feeling uncertain about how to proceed, I watched as Kelly took charge. She greeted Kirk, Cindy, and Jason warmly, hugging each of them in turn. Then she turned her attention to Kathy, extending a polite handshake and expressing pleasure in meeting her. I took my lead from my wife. I shook Kirk, Jason, and Kathy's hands and gave Cindy a small hug. We chatted briefly and the music began playing. In a surprising twist, Kelly suggested, "Randy, why don't you dance with Cindy and I'll dance with my ex-husband? Kathy, why don't you and Kirk share a dance as well?" I looked at Kelly with a questioning expression, but she just smiled knowingly. So I danced with Cindy. I asked about Kirk and Cindy's well-being because I couldn't think of anything else to say. Cindy responded that things weren't going particularly well and mentioned that she suspected they were headed for a divorce because she believed Kirk had been unfaithful. Expressing genuine sympathy, I told her I was sorry to hear about their situation. Cindy responded skeptically, questioning whether I truly meant my apology, as she expected me to say something along the lines of, "It serves you right." I initially expressed shock at the comment, stating that I would never say such a thing. Then I realized there had been a time when I probably would have said something similar. Well, to be truthful, when we first broke up, if you'd come to me then, I probably would have said something like that. But I couldn't hate you. You were my first love, and it hurt to lose you. But life moves on, and so have I. Shortly after that, the music stopped, and tears began to stream down Cindy's face. She expressed regret, admitting that leaving me was the biggest mistake of her life and lamenting that there was nothing she could do to rectify it. As I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but feel genuine sympathy for her. Kelly put her arm around me, prompting me to lean down and kiss her. I inquired about her dance with Jason, to which she responded with a smile, saying that he was still an idiot. He actually tried to put the moves on me. He told me that he's ready to settle down, and he'd be more than happy to take me back. I just laughed at him and told him, why? Why would I want him when I had the greatest man in the world? I watched Cindy reach their table and sit down. Even from this distance, I could see the tears. Kirk and Jason appeared to be having a heated discussion. If I had to guess, I'd say that Kirk tried to put a move on Jason's date. I thought back to the pain I had felt when Cindy left me. Something like that never truly goes away. It's like a bad cut. It leaves a scar. I also thought of all the planning for revenge that filled me during that time. The pastor had been right. No amount of revenge would have ever stopped my pain. It indeed was time and distance that had healed me. As I said at the beginning, even though I had given up on the idea of getting revenge, I had, in fact, achieved it. My revenge was exacted in the only way that is truly meaningful to someone who has been cheated on. I was living well, loved, and totally happy.
Story 2.
My wife cheated with 2 married co-workers, so I filed for divorce and exposed her affairs publicly. I, 35 male, and my wife, 32 female, have been married for about 4 years. Our anniversary is next month. We have lived in a large Pacific Northwest city for about 3 years, having moved from another part of the state. We've been together for about 9 years in total, no kids. But those discussions have been ramping up this year. We've had our share of downs over the years, and there have been instances when I've been uncomfortable with some of my wife's male friends over the years, while she was in grad school and in her career. I don't think I'm insecure, but the flirting and what now seems to be triangulation, or almost seeming to make me jealous with little hints, might now make some sense. It's led to fights and disagreements, and she has a history of mood swings, some depression, and ADHD. She currently works at a large sales marketing firm, and I'm in engineering. Up until a few weeks ago, I was under the impression that we had a solid marriage. Our sex life is normal as far as I can tell, and although she makes more money than me, I never thought it was an issue. I have noticed the fights increased over the past 18 months, but over the past few months she's been very attentive, although seemingly more depressed, and she's lost a ton of weight. She is small, but went from that to skin and bones and not eating much. I think I know why. 2 weeks ago, I received an anonymous text message from someone that works with her. This person did not identify themselves, but given the information in the text, I'm pretty sure I know who it is, a good work friend of my wife who is married, that we socialize with as couples. The text came in 2 parts, and the sender expressed a lot of sympathy for me. I deserve to know what's going on. In short, according to the sender, my wife has been or was having a long-term affair over a year with a good guy friend of hers at work, who's 10 years older than her and married with a kid. Apparently, they expressed that they loved each other, and it sounds like they spent a lot of time together unbeknownst to me. As if that's not bad enough, my wife also started another affair with a second married guy who works at the same company and is about 20 years older than her, with several kids. That one was going on for a few months. Someone at my wife's office caught them in an empty office one afternoon having sex and reported it to my wife's HR. It turned into a mess, and all 3 of them had to speak to HR. The 2 guys didn't know about each other, and it supposedly got ugly between them too. My wife is likely getting fired along with the guy she got caught with. As you can imagine, I'm barely holding it together. We've had family at our house, so I've kept myself under control, and my wife does not yet know I received the texts alerting me. She also said nothing about any of this and has lied to me repeatedly over the past year about the guy with whom she had the longer affair. I sensed something was up and mentioned it several times, and she just told me I was being weird. That we're just friends and so on, so I dropped it. We have different cell plans, but I figured out her password, and seeing all the texting and photo texts between the people I have now identified as the affair partners was sickening. There are also a large number of texts with another number, but I couldn't figure out who it was. I just know it's not any of her close girlfriends because I also have their numbers. I'm at a loss and feel like an idiot. It's the holidays and family is here, so I'm keeping a brave face, but once they leave after New Year's Eve, I just don't know where to start. I can't even understand what's going on here with what is serial cheating, all the lying and manipulation she's been doing. Is there any coming back from this? Or for those of you who have been down this road, what do I do next? I feel like I'm going to lose it any second, and I appreciate any advice, regardless of how harsh it might be. Looks like Santa's not the only one coming to town this holiday season. Seems like your wife's been hosting her own little naughty list party, complete with workplace shenanigans and surprise affairs. Who needs mistletoe when you've got office desks for rent? Forget about decking the halls, it's time to deck the halls with caution tape and divorce papers. And as for those anonymous texts, it's like a festive gift exchange of betrayal and deceit. Just remember, 'tis the season to be jolly, even if your wife's been busy spreading more than just holiday cheer. So grab a glass of eggnog, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself for the wildest ride of your life. Who knew our space could be so eventful? Update, thank you to everyone who has responded and reached out. It's been helpful and kind. I thought a lot about what everyone said and ended up trying to sync my work iPad with her phone, and it worked mostly. I got a chance when she went outside for a bit with her nieces and nephews and left her phone charging in our bedroom. I got lucky on the password, which was more obvious than I would have thought, and got it on the second try. Things were as bad as I imagined they were based on what I could recover and the anonymous text. Whoever tipped me off was clearly being truthful. I recovered archived WhatsApp chats and some ongoing ones. I'll summarize as best I can because what I saw disgusted me and probably will traumatize me for a while. My wife was definitely sleeping with both coworkers, and neither seemed aware. Apparently, the long-term guy seems to have really liked her. But their recent convos got icy, as my wife seems pissed that he disclosed the truth about the relationship as part of the HR process several weeks ago, so around when I found out. And probably around the time the HR thing kicked off. She was telling him how much she loved him, but then a week later she's telling him she needs space, isn't sure, etc. There are archived messages, or the ones I could recover going back well into 2022. They are sexual, graphic, include pics, details, etc., and always included I love yous on both sides. Short-term guy, the much older one, is worried about his job but also keeps trying to get her to meet to hook up. She keeps her distance, it seems, but some of their chats, they only went back to September, are definitely sexual, expressing sexual wants, etc. It seems less frequent than long-term guy. Not all that emotional, just flirty and highly sexual. She also complained to him about long-term guy making her life complicated, a direct quote, even though it seems long-term guy wasn't the one who caught them, so I'm not sure how he found out. Here's what I ended up doing. I called my boss and explained what I could muster up, and I asked for a few weeks off. He was very understanding and gave me 3 weeks to sort things out and get away. My wife on Friday went out shopping and to a movie with her sister, and that's when I bailed. I packed up all the clothes I wanted, essential electronics, and a few random items, and loaded up my truck with about 4 duffel bags and a few boxes. I spoke with her dad and told him what was going on. He was angry and incredulous at first, but when I shared some of the messages with him, the most PG I could find, he sort of broke down, gave me a hug, and I told him I'd be staying with friends out of town who live about an hour away. Reading those messages, I felt like I was outside looking through a window of a love triangle movie that turned into a horror movie, because it's my wife leading this second life. I'm emotionally exhausted. I feel sick, and I cannot just get my head around how someone could act this way. I feel I need to file, so I'm hoping one of the lawyers I contacted over the past few weeks gets a hold of me this week. Any additional advice or thoughts are welcome. Bravo! Nothing says I'm out of here like a truckload of duffel bags and a getaway to the hills. Just remember to pack your sense of humor alongside those essential electronics. After all, laughter is the best medicine, especially when you're navigating the minefield of divorce proceedings. Update 2. It's been busy last week, or at least I've been trying to stay focused by keeping myself busy, by keeping my life organized as I move forward. Thank you again to everyone who continues to reach out with all the support and advice. Here's where things are at so far. I have not responded to any of her texts or calls. I don't plan to, but it's very difficult. There have been points every day where I break down, but I'm realizing, mostly through the advice I've gotten here, that nothing good is going to come from communicating with her. I want out. I'm filing for divorce, and the longer I go without having any contact, the better for me, even if it feels raw right now. I have an attorney that family has helped me to pay for, and I've gone through the whole story with her several times. Provided all the information she's asked for, etc. I think my wife will be served at some point in the next week or two. At least that's my understanding. The validation I got from my attorney was a relief, but she was also blunt. She said in no uncertain terms that my wife is a narcissist and that this is disordered, awful conduct that is really bad. She communicated that she doesn't see my circumstances too often, multiple affairs at once, at the workplace, and lies to all involved. For some reason, that has made me feel better, like this really is as bad as it sounds, and as bad as it's made me feel. Also, for those who have asked, we were renting our house, and the lease period is up after March. I emailed the landlord, it's an older couple, let them know we were splitting up, I kept it brief, no details, and would not be renewing. My friends have graciously allowed me to continue staying with them, and I'm just going to pay the rent for the next few months and bite the bullet. I can often work remote, and even though my office is a bit of a drive from my friend's place, I can handle it for a bit. I guess I figure this is the best way to live somewhere I feel secure, understood, and don't have to deal with possibly seeing my wife. Finally, the last part. Maybe this was a bad idea, but I did it anyway. I made contact with the two affair partners. I got one of their numbers through a friend of a friend, and the other one I just called at my wife's company and got transferred through. That was the short-term, older guy. I think he's 50 or early 50. I introduced myself, told him we needed to talk, and that I had some questions. He panicked on the phone, seemed nervous, and said he didn't have anything to say and hung up. The longer-term guy and I had 2 calls for a total of about an hour. This is the guy who's 40, I think, whom my wife was really good friends with. As much as I hate his guts, I respect that he answered my questions. I'll say this, he was confident but apologetic, and I believed what he told me based on some specific details we discussed over the course of the calls. He just laid it all out there. What was shocking was the crap my wife told him about me and us. I was verbally abusive, we rarely had sex, I was lazy and checked out, etc. Etc. He acknowledged that he should have never started the relationship with her, and basically did so because he was miserable at home. He and his wife are now separated. And he said he came clean with her about what had gone on with my wife, but admitted that if it weren't for the HR situation, he probably wouldn't have. He even gave me her number if I wanted to speak with her. He shared some painful things in response to my questions, and was under the impression that the crap my wife was telling him about me was real, and that she really meant all the feelings she shared with him. Because their relationship went on so long and he trusted her. I thanked him, and after I hung up the phone, I just broke down again. Many of you reached out and advised to not spend any time wondering why she did this, but I just can't get away from that topic at the moment. I think I'm still in disbelief that someone I trusted and thought loved and valued me could act this way. My mind has officially been blown to bits, doing my best to just get through each day, keeping no contact going, and seeing this divorce process through, which is just at the beginning stages. Please keep the advice coming, it's been so helpful thus far. I must say, your dedication to avoiding contact with your soon-to-be ex-wife is impressive. It's like you're playing a high-stakes game of emotional dodgeball, and you're the MVP, dodging those texts and calls like a pro. And let's give a round of applause to your attorney for confirming what we all suspected. Your wife's behavior is straight out of the narcissist playbook. It's like you're living in a real-life episode of House of Lies, except you're the one getting played. Yikes, sorry, OP. Update 3, this sub has been an immense resource, and combined with the therapist I just started seeing, I hope it helps me get through this in one piece. Hosting a weekly update has been cathartic, and the feedback is so emotionally valuable, thank you. Well, it's getting closer to 2 months since I got that anonymous text from what I assume is a coworker of my soon-to-be ex-wife's, informing me of her serial cheating and the HR issue. The head-snapping shock and numbness has not left me, but it's getting less dense. The realization that the embarrassment, pain, and stupidity I feel is likely going to continue for a long while is tough to swallow. But I've committed to doing the best I can each day to not let it fully conquer me. If I'm being honest, I'm struggling emotionally. I'm keeping it together, but the tears flow each night, and I rarely cry, so I know this is my body speaking to me, so I just let it happen. I retained an attorney with the help of family, and a few of them attended the first real meeting with me. The initial petition or filing is done, and it's going to be served on her at some point in the next week or 2. I feel good that I'm doing that now, and I know it's what's best. My emotions have been up and down about it, but I cannot raise children. Nor do I want to have children or a life with someone that has the traits my soon-to-be ex-wife has displayed. I'm committed to seeing it through. As for my soon-to-be ex-wife, I've still not called, texted, or emailed back. The longer I go, it gets a bit easier, like I've regained some control of the insanity she dropped on my lap. I haven't gotten any calls or texts in 4 or 5 days, but I did get a long email last week and I did read it. In some, it was a lot of "I love you" and "I realize I made a huge mistake" type of language. She said she was sorry over and over, but what struck me was that it was kind of empty. She didn't address much in terms of details about why she was sorry, and just acknowledged that I never should have been intimate with anyone else. I don't know what a remorseful letter or email should say, but I think in my case, there's not much to explain. It's such insane, hurtful behavior that I don't even know if she can explain it. She ended it with a statement that she's hoping we can talk things out at some point. I also ended up calling the long-term affair partner's wife. I took him up on the offer, and actually, what he told me checked out. Surprisingly, it appears he was an open book with his wife once the secret spilled out. The lady was nice and to the point, said that they had been struggling for years. They have now separated and will also be filing soon. It's weird because she didn't seem angry. It was like she was relieved. She said the guy was a great dad, but they were terrible together, and that my soon-to-be ex-wife had really done a number on him. One thing she did say that resonated, and that we discussed, is that she was very hurt that he didn't end things with her before it started. She thinks he was afraid to just get the divorce, but the affair part caught her off guard and was embarrassing because she felt like a safety net. I can relate. It's like they're afraid to risk being alone or something. The nature of what my soon-to-be ex-wife did is far too much for me. I've read a lot of stories on here, and I've seen a few where people don't leave when they discover serial cheating and all the lies. I can't imagine staying, so disgusted but also heartbroken at the same time. Also, I don't know yet if she is losing her job. I was told by the affair partner's wife, the one I spoke to, that she's on leave, which doesn't sound good. I will post again when I can, just trying to focus on getting through the mess. Nothing says I'm truly sorry like a generic apology with the side of, I never should have been intimate with anyone else. Ah, the poetry of remorse. And who knew you could bond over shared betrayal and shattered dreams? It's like finding solace in a sea of despair. Update 4, thought I'd share the latest because this sub has been a major lifeline for me the past several months. And a big thank you to each and every one of you that has reached out individually. I truly appreciate it. Well, here you go. She's been served, and the divorce is underway. It was a huge mixture of emotions and continues to be as I waver back and forth between relief, sadness, crying fits, anger, and just about every emotion one could feel. I still feel like I'm in a horrible dream, and I struggle to realize sometimes that this has actually happened. Never in a million years did I think this would happen. Her sister and her husband, I guess my ex-brother-in-law, have individually reached out and shared their disgust and support. Neither one of them knew, apparently, and according to my ex-brother-in-law, who I was quite close with, they aren't hanging out with her. If nothing else, I appreciated their kind words, but I don't actually think they'll freeze her out forever, nor do I really care about that part. But it did feel nice to not have them blame me or ignore me. They both genuinely seem to be at a complete loss over this. I still haven't spoken to my ex or communicated back in any way. There are still calls and texts, but they're less frequent. My understanding through the grapevine is that she was fired and is living with her parents or will be soon since the house we rented had the rent covered by me through March. Not sure if she's fully moved out or what, but I gathered that she's struggling and has lost even more weight. But apparently she's gotten the lips done even more than what she had before for whatever reason. Full honesty, I did read a few of the emails she sent before I had to stop. It was a lot of the I love you stuff, tons of apologies, but no directly addressing her behavior or why really. She claims she's really messed up and that she got carried away because it was easy for her to connect with these guys. She liked the attention and never meant for me to see their messages. I sat back when I read that part. And it struck me that she obviously would have kept doing this if whoever had caught her at work hadn't walked into that office that day. She also claims she never really loved the long-term affair partner and that she only loves me, but that's obviously impossible to accept. Given the nature of the messages I saw and the consistent emotional expressions of that very thing for the better part of a year. I guess if she was lying to me, it makes sense she was lying to these guys too. I don't know, it's just such insane behavior. I suppose this is more of a stream of consciousness than an actual update, but I just feel adrift. I don't want her back. But it's terrifying on some level to be in this position. Trying to understand how someone could look you in the eye and lie so consistently and pursue multiple other relationships at the same time is gutting. The long-term affair partner is tall and good-looking, so that doesn't help. But the other guy is a legitimate creep, bald, muscular, but a loudmouth. And definitely a dude that is always looking to hook up. It's a weird dichotomy, especially since she was supposedly happily married to me. I don't know what to make of it. I think it was just getting the validation and attention from anyone, I guess, but the more I read and the more I really think back and connect the dots, the more it seems clear that she is in the personality disorder category. I realize that the best avenue is to just move on and forget her, but that's much easier said than done. It's so hard, and trying to understand the behavior has helped me heal. That's all for now, but as always, any thoughts or advice are welcome. Thank you. Ah, the joys of marital bliss unraveling like a cheap sweater in a washing machine. Congratulations on serving those divorce papers. Nothing says it's over, Buttercup, quite like a legal document arriving at your doorstep. Here's to moving on, one bewildering step at a time. Remember, the best revenge is living well, or at least getting through the day without breaking down in tears. Keep those updates coming, because nothing beats a good old-fashioned train wreck of a love story. Cheers to your newfound freedom, and may your future be filled with fewer bald, muscular creeps and more genuine connections. What do you make of all this? Do you have a similar story? Share it with us in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today. Be sure to like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time.
Story 3.
Approaching April 1st, I eagerly awaited a prank from my husband Lester.
Over the years, our history as pranksters had seen an annual increase in the severity of our jokes. The streak of mischief began with me one warm day when Les and I went out. Despite wearing a buttoned-up jacket, I claimed to feel a chill as we strolled through the mall. Suddenly, I removed my jacket to reveal a t-shirt with the words, "I am with stupid," complete with an arrow pointing sideways, standing right next to me. He couldn't initially discern what was on my t-shirt, only noticing the amused reactions of passers-by. It took him a while to realize that every time I shifted position, it was to ensure the arrow on my t-shirt was pointing at him. His face turned crimson, and thus commenced our official prank war. Then came the year when I received an official-looking email, supposedly from the local health department, claiming I had been listed as a lovemaking contact of an Anthony Sanders and instructing me to undergo immediate testing. What I hadn't anticipated was the CC line, including everyone in my office, suggesting they had received the same alarming message. Most of them knew Anthony as an old college boyfriend, oblivious to the fact that I hadn't seen him in over a year, let alone been involved lovingly. "Lester, you got me good." Last year I edited a photo, replacing my husband's average-sized member with a comically tiny one and sent it around his office. Truth be told, he's actually above average in that department. He was furious, spending 2 nights away before even considering coming home. No matter how much I apologized, I ended up resorting to an offer of 3 specific favors just to coax him back. 3 bed acts he couldn't refuse. Once home and appeased, he claimed our pranks had spiraled out of control, vowing never to retaliate or prank me again. His promise seemed sincere, but I didn't buy it. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, plotting his revenge. I was certain this year would showcase the darkest corners of his devious mind. I waited, a mix of anticipation and dread. I went to extremes, eavesdropping on his calls, planting a recorder in his car, even scrutinizing our finances for anything suspicious. I was determined not to fall for his prank this time. Yet, my snooping turned up nothing incriminating. He was far cleverer than I had given him credit for. As March passed, Lester appeared unchanged at home while I scrutinized his every move. From midnight on March 31st, I was on high alert. But nothing occurred right after midnight, leaving me on edge. There were still 19 hours for him to spring his plan. I swore to be prepared for whatever he had up his sleeve. The following morning, April 1st, when I descended to the kitchen, he casually offered to whip up breakfast, a rare gesture that immediately raised a red flag. There was no chance I'd consume anything he prepared. I claimed I was in the mood for just cereal. That morning, while pouring myself a bowl and adding milk, I discreetly sniffed it, on the lookout for any added substances. Nothing. A tentative taste confirmed its normalcy. I stubbornly skipped the coffee, citing a reduction in my caffeine intake. Truthfully, I avoided it because he made it. I observed him preparing his beloved ham, egg, and cheese English muffin, almost tempted to ask for one despite the risk. Post-breakfast, we both got ready for work. Amidst checking my toothpaste for tampering and ensuring my cologne retained its usual fragrance, not skunk odor, everything appeared normal except for my sore anxiety. I inspected my car for any suspicious devices, wishing for one of those border-crossing mirrors on a stick to scrutinize beneath. It all seemed regular, yet my heart drummed loudly when I started the engine. Testing the brakes unnecessarily, I scolded myself Lester wouldn't resort to anything physically damaging. I repeated that to reassure myself, but doubt lingered. He was seriously upset about my last prank at work. My enthusiastic best friend, Marta, eagerly greeted me and expressed her curiosity about Lester's antics the previous night. I had confided in Marta about my concerns regarding Lester's impending April Fool's trick. Recalling her support for my prank from the previous year, she jokingly requested an unaltered version of the photo, or even better, a private viewing in our bedroom. I noted her eagerness for some excitement in her life. I shared with Marta that Lester had been relatively quiet, but I was convinced he was plotting something. I could sense it in the air at night. Marta playfully commented on her love for slipping song lyrics into conversations, prompting a chuckle from me. I believe he's prolonging my suspense just to push me over the edge. Well, he doesn't have far to go right now. But mark my words, Whatever he pulls, I won't fall for it. He may be the prince of pranks, but I am the queen of jokes. We laughed, and then I finally indulged in my much-delayed morning coffee. I checked my desk for unexpected surprises and went about my work relatively normally, though occasional thoughts of what might await me later lingered. The first time my desk phone rang, I practically leaped out of my chair, chuckling at my own Hayden nerves. Nothing out of the ordinary happened for the rest of the day. I half expected a delivery of risque items that would accidentally be revealed in front of my colleagues, but thankfully, nothing of the sort occurred. As the workday's end neared, my anxiety skyrocketed. At 5, I hit the road, nearly missing the red light. As my mind fixated on what awaited me at home, I gave myself a light slap to refocus on driving safely. Upon arriving home, I started preparing dinner. Lester arrived at his usual time, appearing completely drained. I suspected it was an act, anticipating more theatrics from him soon. I asked if he had a tough day, dealing with too many graduates struggling with basic math. Lester responded that my remark hit too close to home to be funny. He explained that his mood wasn't due to a challenging day, but rather an exasperating one. The quarterly report deadline had kept him occupied with mundane details and figure cross-checking. Usually done before lunch, today's struggle to reconcile two totals that were supposed to match took an extra 4 hours. He even missed lunch and considered calling to say he'd be late for dinner. Fortunately, he caught the error, wrapped up the report before clocking out, and expressed being absolutely famished. He hoped dinner was on its way within 20 minutes. I suggested he fix himself a drink while I finished up, to which he responded positively, appreciating the idea. Lester leaned in, planting a kiss on my cheek before heading to the cupboard where we stored the liquor. He grabbed the bourbon and mixed himself a drink before settling in the living room, tuning in to reruns of Swamp People. It was comical to think he'd ever venture into a place teeming with mosquitoes, alligators, and snakes. I suspected he had a soft spot for people with Cajun accents. During dinner, I attempted to strike up a conversation, but my focus was primarily on uncovering the impending prank. Eventually, I probed, asking if Lester had anything planned for the night. He responded, stating that he had nothing planned after the debacle with the quarterly report. He emphasized that he didn't even consider bringing work home and expressed his desire to unwind with me by his side. Playfully teasing, he mentioned that since his favorite girl wasn't there, I would have to do. I nudged him in response. After dinner, as I filled the dishwasher with the dishes, I suggested watching a movie and snacking on some popcorn. Lester showed interest, and after preparing the popcorn in the microwave, I brought it in a big bowl to the living room, along with our usual drinks to relax. I asked Lester what he wanted to watch, mentioning that while I typically preferred movies with closeness and roughness, I was open to his choice for the night. I suggested Roadhouse, noting its blend of romance, nudity, and violence, not to mention Patrick Swayze's physique. Lester chuckled in response. "Sounds good to me. I haven't seen that in a while. I love the part when the stuffed polar bear falls on the stug. Was it a polar bear or a regular bear? I thought it was a polar bear, but we can see." We were watching the movie and eating popcorn. I had a couple of rum and cokes to Lester's, bourbons, and Owl. I was finally beginning to relax and let down my guard. Suddenly the doorbell rang, and my internal alarm went off. "This is it," I told myself immediately. "No one comes to our house unannounced after dark." I immediately put my mind on DEFCON 1 alert status and was ready to spoil whatever dirty trick he had devised. Lester, of course, venously denied knowing who it might be. Yeah, right. I went to the door and opened it up. I was surprised to see there was a guy, not just an average man, but a huge biker guy at the door. 2 others were on their bikes in the driveway. I shook my head in disbelief. I thought that Lester, this is going to be good. I greeted the scared, tattooed biker with a knowing smile, expressing my awareness of the situation. I apologized for disturbing him and asked if this was where the party was. Responding affirmatively, I slung my arm around his waist, leading him to the center of the living room. Noticing his firm abs and bulging biceps, my husband, seeing me with this stranger, leaped off the couch, bewildered. He questioned who the stranger was, and I played along, stating that he was here to fulfill my fantasy. My husband realized it was an April Fool's joke and expressed his initial confusion. I acknowledged the prank and continued with the act, telling the stranger, whom my husband referred to as Paul, that his prank was over and he could leave. The stranger, calling himself the bandit, insisted on staying, and I affirmed that I wanted him to stay. I turned to the bandit, planting an exaggerated kiss on him, much to my husband's dismay. Lester rushed over, and the bandit grabbed him by the throat, making him stumble and choke. Chuckling, the bandit pulled me close, caressing my backside while kissing me. I reciprocated, sensing his arousal. Lester charged again, and the bandit knocked him down with a single punch. Addressing me, the bandit asked if he should handle Lester, or if he should stay and watch. I chose to let Lester watch, stating that it would teach him not to mess with me. The bandit agreed and stepped outside to inform the others. Inside, one of the men scanned the room and questioned what was happening, noting that it didn't resemble a party. I explained that the lady, referring to myself, wanted to be involved with bikers before heading to the actual party. Commenting on my assets, they discussed their plans, with one expressing the intention to take my rear first. They noticed Lester on the floor and learned he was my husband, whom I wanted to watch. I suggested tying him to a chair and taping his mouth, offering the materials from the garage. Lester protested, declaring that regardless of the situation being a joke or not, it marked the end of our marriage. I responded, accusing him of setting it up and now being upset because I wasn't playing along as he intended. As Lester lunged again, the bikers subdued him and convincingly pinned him to the chair. I wondered if their coordination was rehearsed. The bikers inquired about getting the party started and asked about drinks. I directed them to the liquor cabinet and the fridge for a couple of beers. Bandit turned to me, asking how I wanted to start and how far Lester had suggested they go. I responded, asking Bandit about Lester's instructions, and he looked puzzled. He mentioned I could go all the way however I wanted. In a referenced version, he did it right. If we're going through with this, I could use some help setting the mood. Got anything stronger than liquor? Absolutely. I always carry something. He fetched something intriguing from his bike. A sip later, I found myself swapping kisses with all three of them, smirking at Lester, who seemed to struggle to break free. Approaching me, the bandit declared, "Time to dance, darling," tearing off my dress and swiftly losing my underwear. Soon he was bare, as were his companions. Panic started to grip me. I hadn't anticipated Les would allow things to escalate like this. I shouted to Lester, "Consider this a lesson if you try to outsmart me engaging with his friend." But when I sensed his imminent climax, I attempted to pull away. "Too bad your pleasure isn't our concern. Your job is to satisfy us," they retorted. The following hour felt unreal, despite my objections and resistance in the midst of this chaotic group. At the end of it all, anger boiled within me towards Lester for orchestrating this and then allowing these men to subject me to such things. Each time I glanced at Lester in the chair, rage surged. Yet I masked my distress. I wanted him to believe I relished it, but I couldn't let him think his prank succeeded. After a couple of hours, the bikers departed. My movements were labored, but I managed to reach the kitchen and grab a sharp knife. When I went to release Lester, I discovered his wrists and ankles were injured. His ankles were bleeding, the ropes having torn into his skin. That seemed to have helped him. Certainly I anticipated his explosion, maybe even a physical outburst once the ropes and duct tape were finally off. Standing there, I glittered at him, ready for his expected fury. But instead of a verbal or physical reaction, he looked at me with silent rage, shoved me aside, and ascended the stairs. I retreated to the downstairs bathroom to cleanse the remnants of the bikers from my skin, noticing numerous hickeys scattered across various parts of my body. I remained in the bathroom when the front door slammed shut. Moments later, the screech of Lester's car signaled his departure. I assumed he'd sulk in a motel, a pattern he'd shown before. I silently celebrated my victory in the annual April Fool's prank and retired to bed, Saturday morning arrived, and my phone buzzed incessantly. It was Marta, asking me to spill the details about what Lester had done. I responded, saying he wouldn't believe it and suggested meeting for lunch at Fridays. Marta agreed, urging me not to tease. At TGIF, we indulged in our meal, and I recounted the actual biker encounter that was meant to be a sham, along with Lester's furious reaction. Marta expressed disbelief that I was involved in that, especially considering Lester had set me up for it. Playfully switching to a terrible Southern accent, she pretended to swoon, and I chuckled. I explained how Lester had tried to deceive me with a prank involving facing a biker, only to shout "April Fools" afterward. I shared that I had outplayed his prank by turning it into a real event. Although I hadn't planned to go that far, it worked in a strange way. I doubted Lester would ever try something like that again. Marta questioned whether I was positive Lester had set it up, expressing disbelief that he would orchestrate something so extreme. The possibility of a messy divorce was raised, and there was a suggestion to get rid of any video, with a cheeky request for a copy. While I dismissed Marta's last remark, her earlier words triggered a troubling thought. What if it wasn't a setup? The idea of a potential divorce weighed heavily on me, a dire possibility I was hesitant to consider. It felt like I might have shattered my marriage, but swiftly I pushed the thought away. Convinced it had to be a setup, that's what I stuck to, reassuring myself and trying to believe it. Then, a realization struck me, prompting a question about the last time a biker showed up at my door looking for a party. I wished it were true, and Marta acknowledged the possibility that I was right. The focus shifted to Lester's whereabouts, speculating that he might be sulking in some motel, furious that I had outplayed his prank. Just then, my phone buzzed, and I told Marta to hold on, thinking it might be Lester. However, disappointment washed over me as I realized it wasn't him, but an unfamiliar number. Upon answering the call, a voice I didn't recognize asked if I was Carrie Lynch. Inwardly groaning, I assumed it was a telemarketer and preemptively declined any offers. When the caller identified themselves as the police and mentioned injuries sustained by my husband, I dismissed it as another part of Lester's failed prank. Despite the assurance from the caller, claiming to be a detective named Fredericks, that they had checked my house and spoken to Lester, I doubted the legitimacy of the situation. Refusing to play along, I told the supposed detective that I would be home in an hour, or whenever I pleased. If he wanted to talk, he could come by later. I ended the call abruptly. Marta expressed concern about the police calling me and suggested I should go see Lester. I shared my skepticism, unsure if the caller was genuinely a detective or just another one of Lester's ploys. Convinced that Lester was taking the joke too far, I expressed a desire not to dwell on it and proposed getting dessert, specifically craving chocolate. I arrived home post-lunch to find Lester absent, which wasn't unexpected. Just as I'd started to remove my jacket and hang it up, the doorbell interrupted. Letting out a heavy sigh, I made my way to the door. A female police officer and a man who seemed to be a detective stood there, flashing badges and requesting entry. The shock hit me. It was real, entirely unlike what I had anticipated. Doubts crept in. Perhaps they weren't really law enforcement. I'd asked to see their identification. They presented badges, Idaho cards, driver's licenses, and business cards. Everything checked out. Apologizing for my initial skepticism, I welcomed them in. That's when I remembered I hadn't tidied up from the previous night. The living room remained untouched since I'd gone to bed, displaying empty beer and liquor bottles, stains on the couch and rug, and of course the chair. The detective focused on the chair where Lester had been bound, noting the cut ropes, used duct tape, and blood stains. I hadn't realized there was so much blood. The detective asked if this was where my husband was tied up, and I confirmed, adding that it was a bit more complicated. When asked about the complexity, I explained that my husband had orchestrated an ill-conceived April Fool's joke to make me think a biker gang would attack me. I turned the tables on him, making him believe I wanted something that made him uncomfortable. He got angry and stormed off when I freed him. When questioned about who initially tied him up, I mentioned a biker named Bandit and a couple of others. The detective shared that they had already spoken to Bandit, who was cooperating for a more lenient sentence. According to Bandit, I had invited them for a party, requested medications, and engaged in consensual activities. He alleged that I instructed him to tie up my husband to watch the event, claiming it was our shared interest. The detective needed to know if this was true or if they should pursue exploit charges against Bandit as well. I attempted to stop it, but my efforts were in vain. I was trying to teach my husband a lesson in response to the mess he created, and I just went along with it. I hoped the detective could understand. Tears interrupted my words, and I paused before asking about Lester's condition and whether he was still at the ER. The detective explained that Lester was more angry than anything else. His wrists and ankles were bandaged and sore as expected. Lester had been discharged after a couple of hours, but came to the police station to press charges. The doctor anticipated a physical recovery. Expressing relief that Lester wasn't seriously hurt, I acknowledged that it was his fault, and I didn't want to be made a fool of. The detective commented that I handled it effectively, but reminded me that they were not the judge of fault. Judges and juries would determine that soon. Suddenly, the detective stated that they were arresting me for assault and wrongful confinement of my husband. Additionally, they advised me to get checked for STDs, as one of the bikers I was with had a severe and persistent STD. The detective informed me of my right to an attorney. In a plea for understanding, I explained that it was meant to be a prank on me, and I retaliated. I protested against the arrest, arguing that it was Lester's fault, but the detective insisted that I should tell that to the judge. Subsequently, I found myself in jail, attempting to post bail. However, I discovered that my cards had been canceled. Despite the humiliation, I called my father and fabricated a story until he revealed that Lester had already contacted him. My father, who was close to Lester, berated me for minutes while I sobbed. Eventually, he agreed to bail me out and take me home. Upon arriving home, I sent a text to Lester, pleading for a discussion. To clarify things, his reply was cold. "Everything is clear to me. My response is coming soon. I hope for a face-to-face, or at least a call." Instead, I received divorce papers citing physical exploit and emotional torment. I cried once more. I had allowed a foolish prank to ruin my marriage, an impractical joke to say the least. The trial progressed swiftly. Bandit took the stand as the primary witness. His testimony detailed arriving at the wrong address, being invited by me and others to a party, tying up my husband at my behest, and engaging in consensual relations with me. In exchange for testifying against me, he received a minor sentence for the confinement charge. However, it was my husband's testimony that cut the deepest. He admitted to our history of pranks but insisted he had vowed never to deceive me again. He believed I trusted him. The events of that night shook him to the core, shocking him to an unfathomable degree. Under oath, Lester denied any prior contact with Bandit, any consent to a pretend or real foursome involving his wife, and declared that his love and respect for me vanished that night. Displaying the scars on his wrists and ankles, he mentioned they were a lasting reminder of why he could never trust me again. His admission that he might struggle to trust any woman caused tears, even among some female jurors. My case crumbled when it was my turn to testify. Tearfully narrating my version, I sensed the jury's disapproval, especially from the female members I had hoped to sway. Guilt weighed on me, evident to all, and unsurprisingly, the verdict was guilty. I received a 3 to 5 year sentence, a leniency that could have been harsher. Back in county jail, I awaited transfer to prison when space became available. The final divorce papers arrived during my incarceration, but I barely acknowledged the settlement. One day, Lester visited, and I was puzzled by his presence. He sarcastically remarked that the prison suits me. I acknowledged that I deserved the sarcasm and expressed regret for what I did to him, even if he didn't orchestrate it. Lester responded, stating it was too little, too late, and that he still believed I set him up. He presented a hypothetical scenario, suggesting a twisted motive on his part to orchestrate a divorce with the best terms, a slicker than 50-50 split. He detailed a cunning plan involving squirreling away cash, bribing bikers, deceiving cops, and taking a minor sentence. He mentioned the need for ties to a gang, hinting at someone at work whose brother needed his approval for a promotion. Lester expressed his shock when I took the situation to a level he hadn't anticipated, and he claimed that seeing me enjoy it crushed him. Despite feeling torn between wanting to end both of us, he opted to put me behind bars. Acknowledging his correctness, Lester stated that we were both fools in the mess, but I was the one behind bars. He questioned who the bigger fool was.
Story 4.
When I first met Debbie, I thought I had found someone who shared the same values, dreams, and ambitions as me. We were both at the start of our professional careers, me as an architect, and Debbie climbing the ladder in corporate finance. Our days were filled with long work hours, and our evenings were often spent dreaming about the future, building a life together. As we grew closer, it became clear that we complemented each other in ways that made me feel lucky and fulfilled. We were both young, determined, and ambitious, and those early days felt like we were building something unbreakable. As the years passed, we continued to grow both personally and professionally. We bought a house, spent vacations planning trips we'd never take, and even started talking about expanding our family. Houston, where we eventually settled, became our shared haven. Moving there was like starting fresh in a city brimming with opportunities. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but with each challenge, I thought we were reinforcing the foundation of our relationship. It was the sort of marriage that felt strong, until subtle cracks began to appear. I remember the early days after we moved to Houston vividly. The city was sprawling and vibrant, filled with an energy that made every corner seem alive. Though we hardly knew anyone at first, it didn't take long for us to adapt to the fast pace of our new lives. Adjusting to my demanding role as an architect and accommodating Debbie's frequent business trips kept us busy, but the satisfaction of building a life together made it worthwhile. Most of our weekends were spent exploring the various neighborhoods, soaking in the culture, and meeting new people. That's how we crossed paths with Jenny and Trev. They quickly became a significant part of our lives, joining us for dinners and weekend outings, and before we knew it, we found ourselves counting them among our closest friends. Over time, our friendship with Jenny and Trev deepened. We'd often spend hours at each other's houses after a long week, sharing casual dinners, watching movies, or just talking about life. We were all facing similar struggles, juggling careers, relationships, and the inevitable stresses of adult life. It felt great to have friends we could count on, even though both Debbie and Trev traveled frequently for work. The comfort of familiarity helped us cope with their absences, but as I would later learn, there were things happening beneath the surface that none of us saw coming. That Saturday afternoon, we had company, Jenny and her husband, Trev. Since moving to Houston, they had become some of our closest friends. Our weekends were usually spent together, going out for dinner, attending local events, or just hanging out at each other's homes after a movie or a walk. Both couples were at the same stage in life, college graduates in our early 30s, trying to balance student loans, growing careers, and for Trev and Debbie, frequent business trips. Deb was preparing for one of those trips, and Trev had just left our place for the airport to catch his flight to the West Coast, which was part of his work territory. This was our normal. They traveled, and we kept things going. Back home, Jenny and I worked as an accountant and an architect, respectively. Our travel was rare, if not occasional. Usually, only one spouse in each couple was on the road, and when that happened, the other spouse would join the remaining couple for dinner, or a weekend get-together. After Trev said goodbye and headed to the airport in a taxi, I let the women chat in the kitchen while I went out to the garage. I cleaned off my workbench and checked the security system we had invested in after a string of recent break-ins. Our setup included microphones and cameras in every room, all connected to a server in the attic. The system saved everything to the cloud when the motion sensors activated. I could check any room using the app on my phone or any computer I had access to. Out of habit, I checked to make sure everything was working. "How was your last trip?" Jenny asked my wife, Debbie, as they sat together at the kitchen table. "The usual," Debbie laughed. "Work, dinner, a bar, and then eventually some sleep. Is it true what they say about people who avoid their families on business trips?" Jenny's concern for her husband was clear. Debbie paused for a moment before answering. "I wouldn't worry too much, Jen," she replied, taking a sip of her drink. "Trev always comes home to you, doesn't he?" "Yes, but I wonder what he does when he's alone." "If he's alone," Debbie reassured her, "he comes back to you. Don't focus on what happens when he's not there." "What do you mean, Deb?" Jenny asked. "Exactly what I said," Debbie replied. "What happens outside the house means nothing." I was stunned as her words echoed in my mind. What happens outside the house means nothing. What happens when people aren't home? It doesn't mean anything. Did she really just say that? "Debbie, what are you trying to say?" Jenny asked, clearly anxious. But by then, Debbie had retreated into a more reserved tone. "Nothing, Jen," she responded carefully. "Just that you're worrying for no reason. Trev loves you deeply. He comes home to you, and his trips are purely business, nothing more." It was obvious Jenny wasn't convinced by Debbie's response, but she allowed her to change the subject. I left them to their conversation for a while before returning to the kitchen to pour myself a cup of coffee. After hearing that, I wanted my mind to be clear. About 40 minutes later, Jenny said her goodbyes and drove home, and we settled in for the night. I was polite to my wife, but cautious. To say her words made me uneasy would be an understatement. As she went upstairs to take a shower, a flood of thoughts rushed through my mind. Had she cheated on me during her trips? Was this something she had done many times? Or was it just once, recently? The way she had said it was revealing. Her comment wasn't reflective or filled with regret. In fact, there was no fear or disapproval in her tone, just a simple statement of fact, accepting it as it is, without guilt. What should I do? What does any man do in this situation? Could I just talk to her about it? Was I really about to throw away 4 years of marriage? We had even talked about having kids. Had she slept with someone while traveling? How could I be sure a child would be mine? I started thinking about her usual business trips to Phoenix, San Diego, Seattle, and Omaha. Did she have a lover in each city, or just one person? Was he better looking than me? None of these thoughts made me feel anything but disappointment, anxiety, and sadness. The woman I loved had betrayed me. As much as I wanted to believe otherwise, the rational part of me knew the truth. Debbie, with just a slip of the tongue, had revealed her infidelity. I didn't sleep with her that night. She came downstairs to get me, but I pretended to be asleep on the sofa, my face buried in the pillows. She tried to wake me, but I stayed in a deep sleep, and she eventually gave up. I didn't turn to face her. I stayed in that position until I drifted into a restless sleep, until morning came. The first thing I noticed when I began to wake up was the smell of coffee and the sound of her sandals in the kitchen. I opened one eye and saw a cup of coffee on the table. Anxiety washed over me, and I didn't move or speak. I knew I was just delaying the inevitable. When I finally opened my eyes, Debbie was standing near the sofa, wearing only sandals and a robe. Her blonde hair draped over her right shoulder, and she looked at me thoughtfully. I stood up without touching the coffee. She gave me a worried look as I walked past her silently. I locked the bathroom door and started brushing my teeth. I heard creaking sounds from behind the door, signaling she was standing outside. But then they faded away. We didn't say a word to each other that morning, and I was relieved. I wasn't ready to talk. I wasn't scared to confront her either. In fact, I was almost looking forward to it. But first, I needed to know for sure. I needed facts. That's how I operate. I never take a step without knowing what's going on. Grabbing my laptop, I set up in the corner office of our living room. The desk faced the room, so I could work without her seeing my screen. Debbie walked back and forth between the bedroom and the kitchen, but she kept her distance. The silence between us made me angry. Why didn't she ask me what was wrong? Was this part of her game? After calming myself down, I focused on finding private investigators in the cities she traveled to. I filled out the necessary forms, wrote descriptions of what I needed, and used my personal credit card to hire 4 detective agencies to investigate. "Are you hungry?" she finally asked around 2 p.m. I had no interest in eating with her. "No," I replied, pretending to stay busy. She glanced at me from the kitchen, clearly trying to figure out what was wrong, but I refused to make eye contact. Any wife who had nothing to hide would be wondering why her husband had turned his back on her. Any wife who had nothing to worry about. "Maybe we could go out somewhere?" I suddenly said, standing up and grabbing my wallet, phone, and car keys. She looked surprised for a moment, then nodded and reached for her purse. Her phone was already in her hand. She always kept the same number, never let it out of her sight, and it was password protected. As we headed for the door, I let her walk out first, and I stared at her youthful, beautiful figure, a figure that, until last night, I thought belonged to me, just as much as my own body. We always took my car when we went out, so she moved to the passenger seat, waiting for me to open her door like I always did. Given everything that had happened, this was the last thing I wanted to do, but I forced myself. No matter what had gone down before she left on Tuesday, I needed to make sure she didn't suspect anything. I feared I might have already messed everything up. "Sorry about today," I said. I think I made a mistake on the project and need to do some quick fixes and explanations when I come in on Monday. About? She replied, sounding relieved, but quickly caught herself and looked concerned. Johnson's project. She asked about the house. I finished that 3 weeks ago. So much for her paying attention during our conversations. No, I corrected her. Something for a future project. This week, I'll be working on new drawings and correcting my mistakes. Everything has to be perfect. I just hate making mistakes. You're too hard on yourself, she said more calmly once I gave her the expected explanation. Everyone makes mistakes, I almost said. That's for sure, but I held back. We talked about random small things and eventually about bills. Meanwhile, I was thinking about how I'd have to go to bed, knowing I couldn't get away with pretending to sleep on the couch again. When we got home, I took a shower and got into bed with my tablet, trying to read. But I just stared at the same page for 30 minutes while Debbie showered and then left the bathroom. She put on her robe, something she did when she was undressed underneath, signaling she wanted sex. We had sex. I remembered the last time we made love, the last time she was truly in love with me. She lay next to me in her robe, and I kept pretending to read. She placed her hand on my thigh and moved closer. "Are you mad at me?" she finally asked. I didn't respond immediately, but turned to study her face, looking for any sign. "I found your pills in the bathroom. You're taking them again." She froze at my comment. "Yes, I know," she said. "I'm really sorry. I thought we'd wait a few more months." I nodded, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. "No problem," I replied. "You're crazy," I added. But it wasn't concern. It was more like frustration. "No," I said. "I don't want a baby right now either." I didn't say, but I thought I did with you. She stayed quiet for a few moments, then moved her hand away as I lay still. After a few minutes, she turned over and turned off the light on her side. I listened to her breathing. I got up, took my tablet, and left the room. "Carson," I heard her say, but I closed the door and went back to the sofa. The next morning, when I woke up, she was already up and dressed. It was 6 a.m, time for my run. She was ready for work. "I made you coffee," she said. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but held back. She probably realized by then that I was upset. "When did you find out about the pills?" she asked. I wanted to say yesterday, but I didn't want her to think it was too recent. "Last week," I lied, no longer caring that I was lying to her. "And you didn't say anything? You didn't ask me what I thought about it?" I replied, "That's all I—" "No problem, Deb," I said. "If you don't want a child with me, then I don't want one either." She seemed like she wanted to respond, but I walked past her. "I'm late," I added. I needed my run. I needed the solitude to clear my head. Running had always helped me focus, starting in junior high, then high school, the Army, and later in college. Running always cured my distraction and self-doubt, both as a young man and as an adult. Now, as a married man, I was considering divorce. That evening, she came home and made dinner. Out of politeness, I sat with her and ate. I barely finished my meal, but I tried to be polite. "Can we talk about the baby when I get back from my trip?" she asked. "If you want," I replied. But all I could think about was what she had said to Jenny. What happens outside the home means nothing. The next morning, she was waiting for me to wake up. She was dressed for her trip, her bag and coat by the door. "Are you going to be okay while I'm gone?" she asked. "I'll survive," I answered. "I always do this, Carson," she said. "I love you." I nodded politely. She noticed the pain on my face, and I saw her wince. I think I heard a sob as she rushed out the door, leaving me staring after her as the car started and drove away. That day, I went to see a lawyer about getting a divorce. Since we had no children, all that remained was to divide the property we had accumulated since our marriage. However, infidelity could factor into the division of assets. We didn't have a prenuptial agreement, which in hindsight was a mistake. But if the detectives uncovered something useful, I could end up with most of it. The lawyers would battle it out in court, dragging the case for more fees. What a mess. Jenny had been texting and leaving voicemails, but I wasn't ready to talk yet. Maybe I'd stop by and see her later. But she beat me to it and showed up at my work, waiting by my car. "Why haven't you answered my calls or messages?" she asked. "I've had a lot on my mind," I replied. "Take me to dinner and then home," she said. "We need to talk." When I reminded her of my wife's remark, "What happens when people aren't home means nothing," Jenny nodded and looked at me. "Where is she today?" she asked. "In San Diego," I answered. "At least that's what she said." "Did you call her at work?" she pressed. "No," I admitted, feeling foolish. Maybe you should have, she replied, because I did. I looked at her for a moment. The following Friday, Debbie returned from her trip. First, she went to work, then came home. By that time, I had already made dinner and set the table. "Oh my God, honey," she said excitedly. "You really went all out." She rushed over to kiss me. It wasn't a passionate kiss, but the kind that married couples often exchange, even in public. I let her kiss me, and it was quick. No awkwardness lingered. In that moment, I thought this kiss and the warmth of her hand on mine might be our last. "Trev and Jen are coming over for dinner," I said as I checked the stuffed peppers in the oven. "Trev and Jen?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, they'll be here tonight." I could sense her unease. "I thought you and I—" She trailed off when she saw me turn and give her a polite, disarming smile. "I guess I'll go change," she said, heading to the bedroom to take off her business suit. She'd attended her last meeting that morning in Omaha, then flew home and stopped by her office before returning. It was clear she had planned to take a shower, have dinner, and relax after a long, stressful week. I checked my phone one last time for any messages from Jen. One had arrived just 5 minutes ago. I heard the shower upstairs turn off. If all went as planned, Deb would be ready just in time for our guests. "They're on their way," I called up to her, but there was no response. I could guess why. Seeing them was the last thing she wanted. She came downstairs wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, the straps of her pink bra visible underneath. She had on flip-flops, the kind we both wore when we were relaxing at home. She smiled nervously at me and put a hand on my shoulder. "How can I help?" she asked. "I've got wine chilling in the fridge," I said, checking the stuffed peppers again. "Dinner will be ready in about 15 minutes. "It smells wonderful," she said. "What's in the pot?" "Orzo pasta," I replied. She looked sad as she nodded. It was the dish I'd made for her on our last anniversary after we fell in love with Greek food on our European honeymoon. The memories made me sad, but this evening had to happen, and this was part of it. The table was set for 4, 2 on each side. She glanced at me briefly before taking a bottle of Zinfandel from the fridge, opening it, and inhaling its aroma. "Can I ask?" she started to say, but the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I said, and left her in the kitchen. I whispered to myself, "It's showtime." I opened the door to our friends who were standing close by. Trev looked a bit uneasy, but Jenny gave me a knowing smile before leaning in and kissing me on the lips right in front of him. "Hello, Stallion," she said as she pulled away and walked past me. Trev didn't seem surprised by our public display of affection. "Hi, Trev," I said, smiling, though it wasn't a grin. "Come in, Carson," he replied, entering the house. Jenny and Debbie were already chatting in the kitchen when we joined them. For the first time in a long while, I noticed Trev scanning the room. His eyes moved from Jenny to Deb, and then to me. He looked like a man trying to piece together what was going on. "We're having a European-style dinner tonight," I announced. "Jenny's sitting with me, and Deb will sit with Trevi." Trevor and my wife exchanged quick glances before looking away when Jen giggled. "I think I like this. A European-themed evening, from the food to the seating." "What else do Europeans do?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. Trevor and Debbie remained silent as they sat next to each other, clearly uncomfortable, while Jen kept chatting away, being her usual self. Inside, I almost wanted to laugh. "Europeans share more than just seats at the table," I replied, grinning at Jen, who grinned back and laughed. "They swap spouses or have open marriages." "Interesting," Jen said. "What do you think of that, Trev?" He tensed up. "I wouldn't like it," he replied quickly. My wife flinched slightly and then looked away. "I don't know, Trev," Jen responded. "Maybe the Europeans are onto something." Once again, my wife and Trevor exchanged uneasy glances. As I served the food, I poured everyone a glass of wine without giving them the chance to decline. They'd need it soon enough. As we ate, Jen complimented the dish and how well it was prepared. Debbie and Trevor politely agreed, but it was clear they were on edge. "How was your trip, Trev?" I asked as we continued eating. Both he and my wife stopped mid-bite, almost in sync. It would have been funny if it weren't so sad. With every passing minute, the weight of realization grew heavier. The only thing that kept me calm was Jen's hand resting on my thigh, not in a sexual way, but as a soothing gesture. "Same as always," he replied. "Meeting clients, visiting our regional reps, then on to the next city." "What about you, Deb?" Jen asked. "Pretty much the same as Trev," she answered. "We both do similar work, just for different companies and clients." By now, they were both just picking at their food. It would have been almost humorous, but the situation was too grim. I refilled their wine glasses once we stopped eating, which really meant they'd lost their appetite. Jen and I collected the plates. Debbie offered to help, but I stopped her. You and Trev just got back from a trip. Go relax in the living room. We'll join you in a few minutes. Okay, she said, her smile forced and her eyes filled with worry. Trev looked like he wanted to say something to his wife, but she excused herself to the bathroom. I watched as they walked into the living room, exchanging nervous, questioning glances. They might have whispered to each other, but I couldn't hear it, though I could guess what they were worried about. When Jen came back, we joined them. So, you two aren't interested in a European open marriage? I teased with a grin. Jen joined in, laughing. Debbie and Trevor gave nervous laughs, treating it like a joke. Too bad, Jen teased. They're such prudes. Let me show you something I found this week. I think you'll like it, I said. What is it, a chick flick? Jen asked, pretending to be excited. It has a little of both. Masculine and feminine aspects, I replied, turning on the TV and pulling up a file I'd saved on my hard drive. The screen showed a sunny coastal city, then cut to a naval base as the camera followed a car pulling up behind a taxi at a hotel. Trevor hesitated, but Debbie recognized the hotel just before the video showed the two of them exiting the taxi, holding hands as they entered the building. By now, shock was written on their faces. The camera followed them as they checked in and walked to the elevator with their luggage, still holding hands. As the elevator doors closed, they leaned in for a kiss. Carson, stop, Trevor said, but Jen cut him off sharply. Shut up and watch, she commanded coldly. Both of you. I glanced at my wife, whose face was now full of panic and shame. Her lips trembled as she tried to look away from the screen. The video shifted to a shot inside the hotel room, where Debbie and Trevor were both undressed, and she was kneeling in front of him. I couldn't help but think, you would cheat with someone like him? Screw you, Carson, Trevor finally muttered, but Jen quickly shut him down with a slap and a glare. You liked that, didn't you? Trev asked. Do you ever feel just as good with him sometimes? My wife's expression changed. I told you not to mention Carson when we were doing this, she said. Why not? Feeling guilty? Trevor shot back. I just don't want to talk about him. You're liquidating the mood, she replied. After that, they lay down on the bed and the video went on for almost an hour. Eventually, they both took a nap. Deb was the first to wake, lying with her face turned away from Trevor. When he woke up, he reached for her, and she didn't resist as he rolled her onto her stomach. Jen, having seen the video before, looked at her husband with a cold, detached expression. He was angry, but resigned to seeing the evidence of his betrayal. My wife, on the other hand, had stopped watching and was quietly sobbing into her arms. The faucet turned off. Trevor glared at me while Jen came over and sat next to me. Well, she said, that was quite revealing, wasn't it? Debbie finally looked at me and asked, How did you find out? That was all she said. I turned the screen back on, just as expected. Last week, when you and Jen were talking in our kitchen, I replayed the conversation between my wife and Jen. Jen, it's true what they say about people who are away from their families on business trips. I wouldn't worry too much, Jen. Trev always comes back home to you, doesn't he? Yes, but I wonder what he does when he's alone. If he is alone, Jen, don't focus on what happens when he's not there. What do you mean, Deb? Exactly what I said. What happens outside the house means nothing. For added effect, I replayed the last line 3 times. What happens outside the house means nothing. That's what gave you away, Deb, I said. It made me suspect you were cheating on me. I didn't know who it was with, but I realized you were allowing yourself to cross that line. I already had my doubts. Jen jumped in. The way you two always managed to cross paths during your trips, how you sometimes avoided talking to each other, it all seemed suspicious. She turned to me. It's funny how they were so guilty tonight, constantly checking on each other. Both of you were pathetic. I hired investigators in all 4 cities you traveled to, I said. Deb winced, shaking her head as she sobbed again, realizing what was coming next. The next video showed Deb with another man at a bar, followed by them heading toward a hotel room. Oh, you witch! Trevor shouted at her. Did you cheat on me too? Jen and I couldn't help but laugh at his outburst and the desperation on both their faces. But wait, I said sarcastically. There's more. The video continued, now showing Trevor in a room in Las Vegas with a slender, muscular black woman. "My husband never does this for me," the woman said. "I'm glad to help," Trevor replied, as the woman wiped herself with a napkin. I couldn't hold back and clapped my hands at the absurdity. Debbie shook her head in disgust. "What a sight," Jen added. "Cheaters cheating on each other. Priceless footage." We all fell silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. Deb was the first to speak. "Carson," she said, her voice trembling, "what's left for us?" I turned and looked at her seriously. "You know, Jen and I had a few days to talk and come to an understanding. We're both reasonable people. Neither of us are prudes. If either of you had brought up the idea of an open relationship, maybe we could have talked about it. Honestly, I even considered asking you, Deb, but you chose a different path, didn't you? You could have asked me openly so we could have made a decision together. Instead, you chose to be selfish, to do what you wanted behind my back. You lied and betrayed me, us. You betrayed our marriage. How am I supposed to forgive that? How can I move forward with someone who thinks it's okay to do whatever they want when I'm not around, and not just when you're traveling? How long has this been going on at home?" "I bet they already did," Jen said. "I heard from people at his work that your wife took him out to lunch several times." Both Debbie and Trevor turned away, unable to face us. "So what do you want?" Trevor finally asked. "Well," Jen said, "it looks like we have everything we need. Neither of us has children, so we only have to deal with dividing the assets. And since infidelity matters in Texas, you're both screwed. Literally. Give me your phones. Both of you," I demanded. "Unlock them." Deb winced, but handed hers over, unlocked. Trevor hesitated, but Jen walked over and snatched it from him. "It's not even locked," she said, handing it to me. "Give me a minute. I'll check his cloud account." It took a few minutes, during which I looked through Deb's phone. She hadn't written anything down, but her gallery showed pictures of Trev and another man. "Nice, Deb," I said, shaking my head as she looked away. "Here's how this is going to go. I can't trust you anymore. There have been too many lies for too long." While I was talking, Jen was calling out. "Let's go," she said, glancing at what was happening. "You both work for companies that have moral standards. Have you forgotten that?" I saw a look of panic on their faces. Both your bosses and their legal teams would be extremely disappointed with your behavior. One of them is a skirt chaser himself, but after his company had to pay for one of his indiscretions, he now lets his HR and legal departments go after those who break the rules. This must be your boss, Trevor. "Damn," he muttered. "That's why you got into trouble, idiot," Jen told him. "I gave you everything you ever wanted in bed. I shared all of myself with you and never held back, unless I was sick. You betrayed me, Trevor. It's over between us." "Well, not yet." "What do you mean?" "Well," I chimed in, "divorces are inevitable, and both of you will sign papers giving us 70% of the assets. If you fight us, your videos will be shared with your families, friends, and employers." "Carson," Debbie looked at me with pleading eyes, "please don't. Maybe we can figure this out." "Seriously, Deb," I grinned, "if you saw a video of me having sex with Jen behind your back, would you try to work it out?" "Please give me a chance," she begged. "I did, Deb. I snapped. You and I were in trouble before you left on your stupid tour, and you went ahead and did it anyway. You decided to start taking the pills without discussing it with me. We are married. We agreed to live together and make decisions together. You betrayed my trust. Even before you cheated on me with him or anyone else, you lost respect for me, so this was easy for you. I just want to know one thing. Why?" She looked away and then back at me. "Before you, I had no experience communicating with other men. One guy finished in less than a minute. Carson, that was my experience before you. I wanted to try others and see what it was like." I stared at her in disbelief. "You should have thought about that before marrying me," I replied. "This is when people explore, not after they tie the knot. Marriage isn't just a commitment. It's a contract between two people. It means it's just the two of them against the world, and that marriage is exclusive until both agree otherwise. Well, you knew about leaving everyone else behind." She wanted to respond, but paused, then spoke again. "Carson, I wanted to go out and have fun before the wedding, but you showed up, and I didn't want to risk losing you. The first few years were great between us, but this past year everything resurfaced. I started to wonder what other men might be like. It wasn't love. That's why I had you, just for sex. That's all I wanted." I shook my head in disappointment. "All you had to do was ask me, Deb. All you needed to do was talk to me at home. We could have found people we trusted. Damn it, I would have let you sleep with that guy if we all agreed since we were friends. Instead, you two went behind our backs and violated my trust. Debbie, with trust and love comes respect. You lost all respect for me by sneaking around. We could have figured this out together, but you chose to act without me. Jen nodded in agreement. That goes for you too, Trev, she said, especially after we talked. I was taken aback as Trevor looked away, and Debbie stared at Jen and Trevor in shock. Did you do this? Debbie asked. What did he say? That prick told me he would never share me with Carson and that he would leave me if I brought it up again or he caught me. Can you believe it? Debbie shook her head at Trevor and then pushed him away, punching him. You stupid idiot, she said as he tried to shield himself from her second and third blows. When we started, I said we should bring them along, didn't I? But you insisted we couldn't do that and that they would abandon us. I listened to you. Now look where we are. You've turned into a strumpet, Deb. It didn't take long, Trevor said angrily. And after me, you started looking for others. So don't act innocent. I remember our first kiss at Christmas last year. You let me kiss you for a minute or two while Jen was in the bathroom and Carson went out to the car. It took less than a week to get you into bed. I remembered that night. Everything seemed so perfect. We were celebrating with our best friends, and while his wife and I were out of sight, he and my wife were kissing. I screwing hate you, she shot back at him. It's screwing mutual, he replied. Jen and I watched them glare at each other for a few minutes, filled with contempt and distrust. Was there any hope left? It looked hopeless. Too many lies and too much betrayal had occurred. If we had kids or were older, I might have wavered and thought about it. But I was young, and there were no children tying us together. I wanted to leave. The doorbell rang again. This time, Jen answered it. She returned with a woman carrying 2 bags and a smartphone. Deborah Madison Canick, she asked my wife, who nodded. You have been served. The woman handed her an envelope and took a photo. Trevor Gunderson? She asked, looking at Trev, who nodded reluctantly. You have been served. Debbie was now openly sobbing, clutching the papers. Jen turned to me and shrugged before approaching her husband. It's all over between us. Go home, pack your things, and leave. I never want to see you again, understand? If you say anything, the video goes to your parents, your workplace, and anyone you call a friend. Got it? Deb didn't move, but then turned to me and did something unexpected. She knelt down and crawled over to Jen and me. I beg you both, please forgive me and give me another chance. I know I messed up. It's all my fault. Do whatever you want with me. Just don't throw me out onto the street. Carson, please, Jen, talk to him. I'm begging you both. Debbie looked into my eyes, pleading. I realized this was my test as a man. Yes, I loved her. No matter how betrayed I felt, I still loved her. But what she did was unforgivable. Still, throwing her out like that felt wrong. But I would never trust her again. Jen is moving here and into my bedroom, I said, locking eyes with her. I saw her wince. I understand, she choked out, fighting back tears. I deserve it. I need to talk to her about you. Is that clear? The door closed as Trevor left and Jen returned. What are you going to do with her? She asked. You know she can't be trusted, right? I know, I replied. I'm not going to. Debbie looked at us in despair. Please, was all she said. Shut up, Jen replied, pushing her back to the floor. Debbie lay there for a second or two, then got back on her knees. Carson, please don't divorce me. Get your things and go, Debbie, I told her. Pack for at least a week, and we'll discuss how you can get the rest later. When she nodded and began to cry again, her face reflected sadness and reluctant acceptance. She slowly got up and went to the bedroom to gather her belongings. 40 minutes later, she had packed 2 suitcases, a travel bag, a laptop case, and a purse. Jen and I watched her load everything into her car, standing side by side as she drove off for the last time. She reached out to me, but I pulled away. She sobbed again and left in tears. Everything went better than we thought, Jen said, leaning closer to me. They brought this on themselves, I added as we watched my soon-to-be ex-wife's car disappear into the distance. Every spouse has the opportunity to cheat. Not everyone takes it. Funny, Jen said, returning to me. What's so funny? I asked as she began to undress. Some people think they have an open marriage, but they forget to inform their spouse about it. Do you want an open relationship? She asked as I pulled away. That feels too much like dating others, I replied. Do you need it? I just need something different every now and then, Carson. It's been a while since I've had any variety, and sometimes I may need a change, I answered. We agree, she said, breathless. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Jen and I both received the 70% we had requested. Jen sold her house, and I took out a loan to pay Debbie 30% of the house. In one day in court, all financial and legal issues were settled, but not Debbie's pain and guilt. She lost everything except her job. Her parents eventually found out when she started preparing them for the possibility that I might send them videos and photos out of spite. I never did that. Trevor simply vanished after his divorce from Jen was finalized. She had enough money to buy him out, but the last thing he told her was that he would be in touch. It's been 2 years, and we haven't heard a word from him. Debbie still works and travels. What she does doesn't matter to me anymore. The other day, Jen and I were at a cafe when Debbie walked by, focused on her phone. Jen and I live together, but we both fear serious commitment. It's been a year since my divorce, and my memories of Debbie are fading. Jen and I are discussing traveling around the world. Recently, I received a letter. Hello, Carson. I hope you are doing well. I'm trying to live my new life, but to be honest, it's not easy. I miss our time together. I miss you and us. I've had so much time to think about what I did to you, to me, and to us. I ruined everything by believing I deserved to have everything I wanted, regardless of the consequences. In my pursuit of sexual exploration, self-indulgence, and self-fulfillment, I hurt the man I loved and lost my marriage. Not to mention, I helped destroy Jenny and Trevor's marriage. It would be easy to blame him for what happened, but we both know that's not true. Everything I did was my choice. No one forced me. I owe you an apology, Carson. Not just for ruining our marriage and our life together, but also for, as you pointed out, losing respect for you. But before that, I lost respect for myself. I fell for the belief that I deserved the pleasure and experiences I thought I had missed out on. Now, I have the experience of divorce behind me that I never expected. Nothing about it brings me satisfaction or comfort. It's torn me apart. I heard that you and Jen are still together. I wish you both happiness. But to say I'm not jealous would be a lie. Take care of yourself and Jen, your unfortunately ex-wife. With love, Debbie. P.S. Loneliness sucks. What happens outside the home means a lot. I folded the letter and set it aside, staring blankly at the table. Debbie's words echoed in my mind. She admits it, but it doesn't change anything. It's been too long, and what's broken cannot be repaired. Jen noticed my silence and walked over. What's wrong? She asked. I slid the letter toward her. She glanced at it, quickly skimming the contents. Debbie? She asked, and I nodded. She's still stuck in the past, I replied. Even now, she doesn't fully grasp that what she did was more than just selfish pleasure-seeking. It shattered everything. Jen gave me a sad smile and sat down next to me. Some people never learn until they lose everything. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the past still lingering between us. Eventually, Jen spoke up. We're doing better, though, aren't we? I nodded. Yeah, we are. We weren't perfect, but we had each other, and that was enough for now. Debbie's letter reminded me of everything we'd gone through, but it also reaffirmed that we had made the right choices, painful as they were. There was no going back, and I was okay with that. As Jen rested her head on my shoulder, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The letter was the final thread of my old life being severed. We would move forward, leaving behind the tangled web of lies and betrayal that had ensnared us all. The future, while uncertain, felt a little brighter. Let's plan that trip around the world, I said quietly. Jen looked up at me with a smile. I thought you'd never ask. The weeks following my divorce were a strange mixture of relief and confusion. It was as though I had stepped out of one life and into another, yet my mind couldn't fully disconnect from the old world. The echo of Debbie's words in that letter, her regret, her sense of loss, kept pulling at me, even though I knew nothing she said could change what had happened. You can't undo betrayal, and no apology, however heartfelt, erases the wounds left behind. I had learned that the hard way, but there was a kind of peace in finality too. The knowledge that this chapter of my life had truly ended allowed me to breathe a little deeper, sleep a little sounder. I had spent so long caught up in the web of doubt and distrust that I didn't realize how exhausting it had been, living with the constant weight of uncertainty. Now, at least, I had clarity. I knew what had happened. I had made my decisions, and the path ahead was mine to choose. Jen was by my side, through it all, We both knew that our relationship had been born out of pain, out of the broken pieces of our previous marriages, and neither of us tried to deny the complexity of that. But, in a way, it made us more honest with each other. We had seen the worst of what relationships could be: deception, betrayal, lies. And neither of us had the energy for more of that. So we were raw with each other, sometimes uncomfortably so, but it felt like the only way forward. It wasn't long before we started talking seriously about that trip we had mentioned. Traveling the world sounded like the perfect escape, the perfect way to leave behind the wreckage of our old lives and embrace something new. I hadn't realized how much I needed that. Something that didn't remind me of Debbie, of Trev, or of the countless lies that had torn our marriages apart. We sold what we didn't need, packed light, and booked our flights. First stop, Europe. Jen had been before, but for me it was new ground, and I was excited. I wanted to see it all: the narrow streets of old towns, the rolling hills, the vineyards. More than that, I wanted to experience life in a way that felt untainted, unburdened by the ghosts of my past. Jen felt the same. We were both tired of looking over our shoulders, tired of second-guessing every conversation, every glance. Our first weeks in Europe were blissful. We traveled from city to city: Paris, Florence, Santorini, taking in the sights, savoring the food, enjoying the simplicity of being together. There were no expectations between us, no demands. We were just two people trying to live in the present, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about what had been or what might have been. I was simply living, yet in the quiet moments when Jen would fall asleep next to me in some quaint little hotel, I couldn't help but think back to Houston, the city that had been home, the city where it all unraveled. Debbie's letter had brought it all back: the good times, the laughter we had shared, the plans we had made for our future. It was hard not to feel a pang of sadness when I thought about how it had all ended. But that sadness was different now. It wasn't the gut-wrenching grief that had consumed me in the beginning. Now, it was more like a distant ache, a reminder of something that had once mattered but no longer did. One night in a small seaside town in Greece, Jen and I sat on a terrace overlooking the sea, the moon casting silver light across the water. We hadn't spoken for a while, each lost in our thoughts. Finally, Jen broke the silence. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't need to ask who she meant. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not in the same way I used to, though." Jen nodded, tracing the rim of her wineglass with her finger. "I get that. I think about Trev too, but it feels distant now, like it happened to someone else." "Yeah," I agreed. "It's strange, isn't it? How something that was once your whole life can just fade." Jen smiled softly. "Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that means we're healing." I thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, maybe it does." We sat in silence for a while longer, watching the waves crash against the shore. The weight of the past didn't feel as heavy anymore. It was still there, but it wasn't suffocating me. I could breathe. As the weeks turned into months, Jen and I continued our travels, moving through Europe and beyond. We visited ancient ruins, hiked through mountains, and wandered through cities where no one knew our names or our stories. It was freeing, being somewhere where the past didn't follow us. We were just two people, exploring the world together, and that was enough. But even as we moved forward, I couldn't help but think about Debbie's letter from time to time. There was something in her words that lingered, her admission that in her quest for freedom, for sexual experimentation, she had lost the very things that truly mattered. It was a lesson she had learned too late, and while I couldn't forgive her for what she had done, I could at least understand the emptiness she must have felt. It didn't excuse her actions, but it made them make a little more sense. As we stood on a cliff in Santorini, looking out at the vast expanse of the Aegean Sea, I felt a sense of closure. The letter had been the final chapter, the last tie to the life I had left behind. Debbie had made her choices, and I had made mine. There was no going back, no repairing what had been broken, but that was okay. Not everything could be fixed, and not every story had a happy ending. Some just ended. Jen turned to me, her eyes bright with excitement. "So what's next?" she asked, a smile playing on her lips. I smiled back. "Wherever we want to go," I said. "The world's wide open." And it was. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my life was mine again, like the future was something to look forward to rather than something to fear. the pain, the betrayal, the heartache. They were all part of my story, but they didn't define me. I was moving forward, and that was all that mattered. Jen reached for my hand, and together we walked down the cliffside path. The world spread out before us, full of possibilities. We had left Houston behind. We had left the lies and the betrayals behind. Now, it was just us, carving out a new path, one step at a time. And as the sun set behind us, casting a golden glow across the horizon, I realized that I was ready for whatever came next. Ready to live, ready to love, and ready to finally let go of the past. Because sometimes the only way to truly move forward is to leave behind what no longer serves you. And that's exactly what we were doing.